Changxing Market was, as always, crowded with vendors, each of them shouting for people to come up to him and buy his goods. Near one of the stalls with vegetables and fruits, it was possible to stop only because there was a very strange inscription on the apple. 5,000 Cheongdong apples will knock you down. A woman came up to this counter and asked the seller about these apples. Were they really fresh? She thought that they must be quite tasty if the seller advertised them like that. The seller was a fairly elderly man. He answered this question with a woman, that today was the day the goods arrived and these apples were really fresh. The seller asked the woman if she wanted to try one of these apples, but after that, she was ready. If they were really tasty, the woman agreed to buy the seller. The seller took one apple in his hands from this box. In his other hand was a not very big nose. The seller immediately peeled the apple, and it seemed like he was doing it with extraordinary skill. The woman noticed that the seller handled the knife very skillfully, to which the seller himself offered her to try the apple and answered her that this was his only talent, so he should be able to use the knife perfectly. When the woman tried this apple, she realized that they were really very tasty. She told the seller that the apples were delicious. At that moment, she reread the inscription again and thought that the phrase immediately justified itself. After which, the woman said that she needed 2 bags of these apples because her children were returning from extra classes after school, so she asked the seller for a discount. The seller didn't lose his head, looked at the woman and heard that she had many children. He said that then the persimmon that he put in this bag would be free for her. The woman took her apples and said goodbye to the seller. She was happy with her purchase. She said that this old salesman is very nice and very polite. He can find an approach to each of the customers. Before he could say goodbye to the customer, a car pulled up to the old man's counter. This huge black car stopped right next to the old man's counter. The old man was not at all surprised that he had such customers. It seemed as if he had been expecting them. When the car stopped, a thug got out of the driver's seat, after which the guy walked around the car from the other side and went to the back door to open it. He extended his hand and opened the back door of this car so that its owner could get out. When the door opened, the owner's foot slowly appeared and then fell to the ground. After that, it was already visible how this man from the back seat of the car was trying to get up and get out of the car. This man wearing a hat, white scarf, sunglasses, and smoking a cigar headed towards the old man's shop. 2 thugs were following this man. Come closer to the old man. This man took a few more puffs on his cigar. The old man's face didn't change at all. He seemed not to be surprised by such customers. Since it was a market, there were reports from different parts that a large-scale sale had begun. The sellers kept shouting about how they were updating their products and that all their products were absolutely fresh. Others shouted that they were ready to sell 2 for the price of 1 just to hook a buyer. Despite all the shouting, the man with the black car approached the shop where fruits and vegetables were sold and where the owner was an old man. When this man approached the old man, he lifted the brim of his hat, greeted the owner of the shop, and asked him if he was currently delivering apples. At the same time, he looked at the apples where there was a price tag that said 5,000 Cheongdong apples were grown on the spot. The old man replied to this man that they deliver apples if it is within the boundaries of Shul. Immediately after these words, the man in the hat waved his hand, indicating to his repairman that he should bring a suitcase with money, after which the man put the suitcase right in front of the old man and opened it. When the old man saw the contents of the suitcase, he said that if this man adds another 5,000 to the 5,000, he is ready to get down to business right away. There was money, a photograph, and a note in the suitcase. The old man looked at all the contents and carefully studied what was in this rank. Madani was satisfied with everything, and most importantly, he saw a photograph and a detailed address where this person could be found. After which the old man turned his head and shouted to his assistant, his name was Kim Kun, to come over. After the first time, his assistant didn't hear him, so the old man had to shout again. Only after the second time, a young man with long hair appeared from behind the fruit box. One strand of his hair was light in color. The old man told his assistant to finish his work in the warehouse because he needed to deliver a delivery. The guy didn't say anything, just nodded his head. He was ready to fulfill his master's request. Kim Kun very quickly got to the address that was written on the note lying in the suitcase. It was an office center. Once inside, he had to take the elevator to the desired floor, which was covered with advertisements inside. Having climbed to the right floor, Kim Kun held in front of him a huge box of apples, the delivery of which was ordered from him. When he entered inside, he saw many men on this floor. When these guys saw the apple delivery man, they were a little surprised. One of these guys approached Kim Kun and asked how much the apples were and whether he really came to borrow money. He looked at the guy and said that their office was not accepting visitors today. He asked who he was. Kim Kun was very taciturn. He only said one word, that it was just a delivery. When the man heard that it was a delivery, he was even more surprised why they needed apples and what kind of delivery it was, and told the guy that he wasn't very talkative. Kim-kun knew his department well, so he didn't pay attention to what they tried to tell him. He went to the right place. The man near the elevator was simply furious at such impudence. He did not expect it, so he tried to stop the guy by putting his hand on his shoulder and explained to him that this was an adult business. Then this man told the guy that they didn't order any fruit, so he needed to get out of that place as quickly as possible. What happened next, no one working in this office expected. Kim-kun did not talk to this man anymore and threw him aside so that he would not bother him anymore. The guy whose photo was in the suitcase was sitting in his office, and when he heard the noise, he became a little tense. There was complete confusion in the corridor. Some were surprised. Others did not understand at all what had happened, but everyone thought it was an attack. In fact, it was Kim Kun-suk's attack on his target, leaving behind guys lying on the floor who couldn't move. Kim-kun held a photograph in front of him. This was his real target that he had to find. When he entered the office, he saw this guy from the photo. He was sitting at his desk, and when he saw Kim-kun enter his office, he wanted to know only one thing: who he was, who sent him, and does he really not know who he really is? Kim-kun seemed not to hear the man's words and stopped to open the box. The owner of this office yelled at his boys that they were standing there and chewing their snot, and how they allowed this guy to come into his office. He ordered his guys to take this guy. Several guys approached Kim-kun. Coming closer, one of these guys didn't even have time to strike, but received a counterpunch so that he flew to the side. Following this guy, Kim-kun sent another one of these guys to try to attack him by kneeing him in the chest. And he kicked the third one, who tried to attack Kim-kun, and threw him far to the side. Kim-kun continued to stand in the same place where he stood. Around him were three guys who tried to attack him. The owner of this office, who was sitting at the table, was simply surprised by what he had just seen. He was not just surprised, he was very scared. So he started yelling at Kim-kun not to come near him and to stay in his place. The owner of this office was sitting on a chair. He pushed off the table and miscalculated and began to fall. As a result, he turned over and fell upside down with his feet up. Kim-kun didn't say a word. He just watched all this. The apple delivery man came up to the table to see what was wrong with the guy who had fallen out of his own chair. He saw this guy trying to get up from the floor, grabbing the table with one hand. He then jumped up to strike the stranger who had entered his office. Bondan stood up, turned around and pulled a knife from his belt. He always carried it in case of self-defense. He shouted at a stranger who came into his office that he was a bastard. The blonde was yelling at his stranger that he was a freak, and he wanted to know how he found this place. He looked at the guy, whose eyes were covered by long bangs, and shouted that he would show him what it means to be a seasoned fighter, and that this guy would learn the hard way. Then the blonde tried to stab the intruder several times with a knife, but Kim-kun very quickly dodged each blow. The blonde kept hoping that he could defeat this guy, but he couldn't do it. Trying to strike blow after blow, he realized that this guy easily dodges every blow. The blonde was shocked. He wondered what kind of monster had fallen out of the blue into his office. And most importantly, he didn't understand what kind of guy he was with whom he couldn't cope at all. At some point, the blonde caught himself thinking that his opponent was barely moving. At that moment, Kim-kun knocked the knife out of his hand and grabbed him by the arm, after which he pulled him forward and then threw him back so that the blonde flew over his desk. With a very loud roar, he fell to the floor, his body knocking down almost everything that was lying on his table. One of these things was a sword that was received as collateral. The blonde looked at this sword and thought that luck would now be on his side. The blonde began to get up from the floor. He shouted to his opponent, "If he thinks that he will just die like that, then he is deeply mistaken." He screamed in anger that he did not understand at all who he was dealing with, because he was Kim Chun-sam, the bloodthirsty and merciless head of the Kim Chol-chol faction. At that moment, he began to wave a sword taken from the floor. Well, all his screams and all his threats were already useless because the bullet hit him right in the forehead and blood spurted everywhere. It was at this moment that Kim-kun took out a pistol that was lying in his apple box and fired it. Then the delivery man said that he was Kim-kun, a courier for vegetables and fruits from Poknam. This was his business card. Then the courier adjusted the things he was wearing as he had completed his job, after which he took his phone out of his pocket, pointed the camera at the blonde lying on the floor, and gave him a smile. I took some photos. He was convinced that the work was done, and he can give a report on the work done. He sent a photo of this blonde guy with the caption that this is a dear customer, apples successfully delivered. After he had completed the work, he returned back to the market to the shop where he and the old man sold vegetables and fruits. The old man stood behind the counter as always, and it seemed that he was waiting for the next customer. When Kim Kun approached the counter where he was selling, the old man asked him if he had already finished with the delivery, and everything went well, after which he told his assistant to wash up and come because he would cut him a watermelon. The young man went to take off his dirty clothes, and when he took off his things, you could see many scars from injuries on his body. She had a huge tattoo on his back. This tattoo meant that he was a reaper of deadly darkness. And if we speak in ordinary human language, then this guy with long bangs was an ordinary killer. At this time, the old man was standing at the table and was cutting up a watermelon very loudly. You could hear the sound of a knife hitting a wooden board. The juice from the watermelon was splashing in all directions. It seemed that he really liked it. A few minutes later, an old woman came to their outlet and saw a young man eating a watermelon. The old man asked her if she wanted to try it too. It was very tasty. The old man and his assistant thought that their business for the day was already finished and they could rest. Suddenly, a young man appeared in front of their counter, all dressed in a suit. This guy was very concerned. The old man asked him if he wanted to buy some fruit, but he didn't ask what kind of fruit he liked. This guy silently and without saying anything, reached into his inside jacket pocket to get something out of there. This guy pulled out a homicide certificate from his inside jacket pocket that had his qualification number and his name written on it. Despite this, the guy introduced himself. He said that his name was Chon Pothon, and he had come to apply for an internship on the recommendation of the director of Jaknun. He decided that day to take the first step into the world of the killer. The old man in the hall took the certificate of the homicide department into his hands and looked at it carefully and read everything that was written, after which he said that the situation in his store was very unsettled, so he couldn't hire him. The old man thought for a long time about what to do with these guys standing in front of him. The young man was simply furious. He demanded that they order him anyone and anything. If he tries hard enough, he will succeed. The old man answered him that if he tries too hard, his belly button might come undone. The young man told the old man that since he was only an intern, he didn't need much pay. Then the old man opened his eyes and looked at the guy and said that he wanted to ask him something, why he became a killer and why he came into this industry. The young man was clearly upset that they didn't want to take him, but he tried to answer the old man's question that it was a very long story. The guy started telling me that it was necessary to start from the moment when he was still in high school. The old man interrupted the guy and said that he understood everything. His assistant intervened in the conversation and said that it was a very touching story. The young man did not understand because he had not yet really told the whole story. But this young man was very persistent, so he asked them to return to the main topic of their conversation. It was hard for him to talk about it, but he said that the girl he was going to meet told him to forgive him. This girl thought that dating him would be very difficult for her, and they could only remain friends. The young man wanted to learn the answer to the question why she says that. The girl thought for a bit. She didn't know how to tell him so, as not to offend him at all. Then she looked closely at the young man and said that he was too ordinary and had nothing interesting. Then the guy remained standing in that place, holding in one hand a bouquet of flowers that he had bought for that girl. He thought about what she said, that he was too ordinary. That couldn't be. He thought it was just nonsense. He threw the bouquet that was meant for this girl to the side. At that moment, he thought that she was giving some meaningless reason that if she didn't like him, then she should have just told him about it. Then things didn't go as he wanted when he submitted his first resume and hoped to get a job, and he was told that it was a problem. The person who hired him told the young man that the problem was that he was very different from what they wanted to see in an employee of their company. The young man then did not understand what this problem meant, and what this man meant when he spoke about the problem. Then the hiring man replied to Mr. Chong Po Tong that his resume was too for a while. He kept silent and then added too ordinary. These words really hurt the young man. He didn't realize how many times this guy repeated the word too. This man tried to take another look at the resume that the young man had brought. He reread it from beginning to end. He read that the young man graduated from the right college with the right grades, and the results of all the tests were also right. But the army of part-time jobs and internship experience did not impress the company representative. He read that the young man was the second of 3 brothers and had a middle-class family. This person asked the guy if he realized the problem with this resume, but he didn't really understand what the problem was. Then the company representative said that he was not impressed at all by this resume, a resume that leaves no impression at all. Then he added that in sales you need to have something outstanding to be remembered by the client. Regardless of whether it is good or bad, only then will he be able to find this person again. This company representative, having read everything carefully, told Mr. Chong Pothon that he had no chance of getting this job. This is because if he mingles with the crowd, it will most likely be impossible to find him. He compared the young man to a needle on a sandy beach. A company representative said he was sorry, but it was unsuitable. The young man did not know how to react to such a refusal. He decided not to be too upset and thanked the representative of this company. When the young man had almost left the office, the gentleman turned to him and said that if he had an unusual license, then he should try. And then he added that he may seem to be engaged in teaching, but this is just his advice and nothing more. The young man told himself that he was completely unusual and that he was not at all boring, as they had just tried to tell him. If he had a license confirming this, he would be sure that it would help him in finding a job. Therefore, the young man did not despair and decided that he needed an unusual license so as not to seem so ordinary. He left this office and did not despair. He decided that he needed to act, so he went to the nearest office supply store. In this store, he found a catalog of national certifications, and he needed to choose one of these licenses. Having bought a book about national certificates and licenses in this toy stationery store, he decided that the job was already done. So he went home very quickly. It seemed to him that he would be able to solve this issue quite quickly. All for his workplace at home, he L7 viewed the licenses that were offered in this book. The first thing he came across was a citrus sorting license. He thought it was a good license, but very boring, and most likely someone else already had one. Next, a license was proposed for classification by chickens. The young man thought that this was such a common license that it had already become the subject of jokes. The next thing that was offered was a shark dentist license. Although this is unusual, but in order to pass the exam to obtain a license, he needs to buy a white shark. It is expensive. And is it worth risking his life, the young man thought, in order to obtain this license? He looked through the licenses one by one and crossed them out with a red marker because none of them suited him. He was looking for a license that would make him special and that would not be too expensive. Sheet page after page, but not one license was suitable for him. He could not find anything. He was just tense. The blood vessels in his eyes began to burst from the great strain, but he could not find anything that suited him. At some point, he even despaired. He no longer knew whether he would be able to find anything among what was offered to him. But unexpectedly for himself, he came across one of the licenses that seemed to him quite interesting and unusual, and most importantly, not very expensive. Until the next day, the young man went early in the morning to the address where the training took place and where this license was issued. Approaching this building, he saw a large sign where it was written, "National Clown Courses for Parties." The young man confidently took a step forward. He thought that he would be able to cope with this training and would be able to get this license. The young man thought he heard that Mr. X had a clown license. And he also thought that would there be anyone who would say that it is usually necessary to complete a national course for a party clown to obtain a specialist license. He was thinking about learning how to ride a unicycle, juggle and apply makeup when he went to sign up for these courses. He thought that even if it was for the sake of giving up his usual self, he could do it by opening the door. He went inside. He came here to take the certification crash course. When he went inside, he saw guys with a specific appearance. They all looked like bandits. The young man was even a little scared. Could there really be clown courses here? Because all the people who had gathered didn't look like clowns. Turning his head first one way and then the other, he thought that he should have realized earlier that something was wrong and left. The people sitting on both sides of him did not look like a clown and looked too scary. Then the young man turned his head the other way, and then he was sure that this was not a clown course at all. The weapon that was hanging on the wall did not look like something that was used for stunts. It looked more like a modern combat weapon. The young man decided that he needed to get up very quietly and leave the room. He thought that a little more and he was about to be pulled into something very strange. He was not quite ready for this and therefore decided to go out. Almost as soon as he opened the door, he thought that he needed to cancel this course and return the tuition fees. Taking a step forward, he came across two people who were entering this office. One of them was missing one eye and had a huge scar across his entire face. A thug was standing behind him. At that moment, the young man realized that something was really wrong, and he shouldn't have come here, but he can't go out anywhere anymore. The cherry on the cake was that the teachers made a terrifying impression on him. Their looks were simply breathtaking. This teacher told the young man to sit down. He had no choice but to sit down and sit silently and watch what would happen. At that moment, the young man thought that he was in complete shit and would not be able to get out of here. Now it was too late. The teacher said to turn off the lights, and that was how he began his first lesson. His assistant, the thug who was standing behind him, went over to the switch, clicked it, and the lights went out in all the classrooms. At this point, the teacher announced that the 21st group of the National Clown Courses had begun their first lesson, after which the teacher added that no matter what, he welcomes all the dear students whom he will teach. After which he switched the picture on the screen and said that he thought it didn't matter because it was under the separate name of the Killer Training Academy. After which he said that he welcomed the guests who came to the 21st Intensive Training for Killers. Then the young man heard what was being discussed, and he became even more scared. He didn't understand whether he had really ended up on a killer course. The teacher said he hoped there wasn't an idiot here who was seriously here to get a clown license, and if there was, he should show up because he needed to bury this guy. The young man was exactly like that. He came to these courses to get a clown license, but he was afraid to admit it. The teacher's words were interrupted by one of those present at these courses. He said that the introduction was too long. Then this guy stood up and said that he came here to learn the art of killing, and he doesn't want to listen to such introductions that sounded like a cliché from a manhwa. This guy tried to approach the teacher. This guy told the teacher that he sees that he has a long tongue and that he doesn't really know any killing techniques. Then this guy said, taking a knife out of his pocket, that if he was wrong, then he should show him what he was capable of. After which this guy tried to strike the noise teacher. He wanted to see the art of murder. Everything happened very quickly, and the guy got hit by his own knife right between the eyes before he could strike. The next moment, the guy was lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood, and his knife was lying next to him. Those sitting in the hall were a little surprised by what they saw, and the young man was the most surprised of all. At this point, their teacher told them that they should know what the main goal of a hired killer is. He explained to them, pointing his finger at the guy lying on the floor, that they shouldn't behave like that idiot. And the teacher also said that if they get drunk from their power and start emphasizing their presence, the target will reveal all their plans. Nothing comes to mind when you look in the mirror. He talked about the piercings that many of these guys had and the tattoos that almost all of them had. And the teacher also spoke about their threatening appearance and their heavy gait. The teacher said that most of them won't even be able to become killers. All this is because when they start working in this industry, most likely they will be caught by the police, or the target's bodyguard will be able to identify and kill them. Everything the teacher said shocked the young man. The teacher approached him and said that it was very interesting, after which he took the young man by the hand, lifted him up so that he stood up from his seat, and said that he had a skill that they needed to learn. It was the most ordinary one. The young man was simply shocked that the teacher stood next to him and said that he was ordinary. The teacher continued to say that no matter what group he was hiding in, his ability to blend into the crowd was simply very high. He also said that the young man had dead eyes that hid a strong desire to live and true goals. Then he noticed that he had a very boring appearance that would not be remembered even if someone looked at him. The teacher said that the young man is colorless, odorless, and that these are the skills a killer should have. Then he walked up to the young man, lowered his head, and whispered to him that although he was a newbie, he was on a different starting line than these guys, and he had talent. Then the teacher added that if he works hard, he will also do everything possible to raise him. The young man thought that this was the first step of his unknown world, but he decided that he was ready to take this first step. In the next 2 days, he attended all the lessons and learned to shoot a pistol at a target. The reason he didn't hold back after the first day was because for the first time someone acknowledged him and said he had talent, so he worked hard in the next classes. The teacher who whispered to him that he was really talented turned his terrible complex of mediocrity into talent. The teacher taught him and the other guys not only how to shoot and fight with knives, but also how to survive in the water. That's why he took them out and made them jump off the boat into the icy water. After which their teacher said that anyone who wants to give up because their skin is frozen in the cold winter sea can climb onto the boat and get lost. And if they don't want to give up, then they must stick to their willpower and pass this test. Only in this place, his complex was looked at from a different angle, and he himself was also able to look at his girlfriends from an angle. He thought that his ordinariness had become his talent. At the end of the training, the teacher said that, as expected, he was a very capable student. Besides, he was one of the best students in this course, and the teacher was pleased with him. The 21st National Crash Course for Killers was completed by a young man, and he graduated with honors. After which, he was given a certificate of completion of this course, which stated that the said person was a graduate of the 21st group of killers. The guys who studied with him were happy that they were able to complete this course. Well, the young man still didn't fully understand that he had passed this test. He thought that he just wanted to get a unique license, but he was overwhelmed with feelings. On the other hand, he didn't understand why the hell he chose this license, and how he could now get a job with a license to kill. The teacher turned to him and said that on this wonderful day of graduation, his faces should be so downcast. The teacher immediately determined that the young man was only concerned about his employment. The guy wasn't talkative. He was really worried about getting a job because he didn't know what to do with this license. Then the teacher told him to take this business card and hand it to the young man and said that he was sent by Yaknuna. The teacher said that this was just an internship, but he would have a place. Then he added that this was the shop of the legendary killer, who was also his teacher. This is the story that the young man wanted to tell the old man to whom he came to the market to get a job as a killer. The old man listened attentively to the guy until the very end. It seemed that at some point he was even ready to fall asleep. His assistant sat silently as always. His eyes were not visible due to his long bangs, so it was impossible to tell how he was reacting. The old man tried to get up from his chair. He started to groan and talk about what the young man said would be short, but it turned out to be very long. The old man stood up and went to the display case with watermelons. He said that he was already an old man and could not concentrate on such a long story. At that moment, the young man scratched his head and asked the old man for forgiveness for talking for so long. The old man, without turning away from him, said that if he wanted to do something, he should have anticipation in his heart. And if it was all just for money or pleasure, he would have kicked him out right away. The young man looked at the old man and didn't understand what he wanted to tell me with these words. After which the old man turned to the young man and I told him to follow him. He was ready to give him the opportunity. The young man didn't fully understand what was going on, but he decided that he really needed to follow this old man. When they entered the warehouse, the old man stopped, followed by a young man, and then Kim-kun. The old man turned to look at the young man and said that he was willing to let him take the test. The guy didn't understand what kind of test it was and asked the old man. Well, the old man gave him a head. At this time, his assistant Kim-kun used both hands to lift the roller shutter that covered the warehouse. The young man was a little scared by this unknown. He didn't understand what kind of test it was. So he wanted to ask the old man what kind of test he should take. The old man lit a cigarette in the hall and called his assistant. He told the young man to fight with his assistant. And Kim-kun said that if he gives in to him in order to find a replacement for himself, he will cut his salary. The young man wanted to object. He only managed to shout, "Wait," but it was too late, because the old man's assistant was standing behind him and was ready to strike the first blow with his fist to finish the guy off. The young man was very scared. He did not expect such a turn of events when he went to get a job. He thought that he himself would become a killer, but he never thought that he would become a target. Kim-kun hit the young man with all his might but missed because he didn't manage to hit him. The young man jumped to the side and landed right in a box of apples that were everywhere in this warehouse. The old man told the guy who came to him to get a job that his task was not to die in 3 minutes because he needed guys who would not die and would work under his leadership for a long time. He was ready to see how Yaknuna trained him. The young man was simply surprised by everything that was happening, and he was especially surprised by the conditions that this old man set for him. Before he could dodge one blow, he saw the old man's assistant swinging his arm to deliver the next blow. Despite the fact that the young man blocked the blow, it was aimed directly at him and he flew to the side. The blow was so strong that the young man did not understand whether he was still alive or not. The young man only had time to catch his breath after this blow and the vegetables and fruits of Paknam, the selection test, began. If this were his ordinary life, it would most likely look completely different. Namely, as he was used to reading it in comics and books that he read in his life about various heroes. When he picked up these books, he read about the heroes and all their thoughts and all their actions. In all these books, it was written that superheroes threw circles. You can't be afraid. And whoever chickened out must give their revenge. And the most important thing in any manga for boys is that the main characters think everything through. Even when they are being hit, they can't just take hits from their opponent. And they can't die without becoming the king of ninjas. At the moment of battle, the main character thinks about what is the weakness of his opponent, and what can he do at the moment, and what move will be the best to achieve victory. He had read all this many times in books and mangas that he loved, in which the main character was always the strongest and won. All superheroes said that there is only one way to win, and that is to never give up. When he read these mangas, he thought it was incredible tenacity, and he was always happy because the main character used a clever trick again. He just now thought that everything he had read seemed like a lie. In life, it was completely different. He stood and did not know what to do when he received one blow after another from his opponent. Now he realized that while he was being beaten, it was simply impossible to think about anything else. He was only thinking about how to save his life. Because after each blow, the pain penetrated into the nerves, and this blow seemed to him the last one, that he would not be able to bear the next blow. At that moment, he wasn't thinking at all about what to do. He was only thinking about how to save his life and how to avoid being in so much pain. It seemed to him that his whole body was one continuous nerve. Toto was in incredible pain, and it seemed that he would not be able to bear it any longer. It was because of this pain that the person's mind practically did not understand anything, because he felt only one pain. The only thing that was going through his head when he saw his opponent and understood that he would not be able to resist him was for everything to end faster. After another blow, he lowered his head down and saw drops of blood dripping onto the floor. The young man understood that there was only one thought in his head, that he was in pain to death, and he wanted it to end as quickly as possible. After another blow, he thought that he would most likely die. He had no other thoughts. His opponent struck blow after blow from different sides, and the young man did not resist in any way. In his head, there was only one thing, that he would really die. The old man looked at everything that was happening and said that his assistant had only been in the simulator for 1 minute, and he told the young man that if he continued to fight, he would kick the bucket before he did. And then he added, "Does he really want to die before the old man?" His opponent stopped for a few seconds and waited to see what the young man would do. In fact, the survival instinct awakens, and the body seems to cause that everything must stop. The young man's brain was telling him that if he continued, he would die, just like the old man had said. His brain was telling him that he had done enough, and it was time for him to give up. His heart was telling him that he was certainly approaching the matter with determination, but what if he really did die? So it was telling him that it was time to go home and go to bed. The young man understood that if he ran away, even from a place where others considered him special, he would become just an ordinary loser. So the young man decided that he couldn't do that, and he fell to the floor bleeding from the cack hall. He then told his opponent that he would see it through to the end if he had started it. The old man liked these words, and at some point he was even surprised. But he told the young man that he should hold on then. Kim-kun swung his huge fist to deliver another blow to his opponent. This blow must have been very strong. The young man tried to cover his face with both hands. But despite this, the blow was so strong that the young man broke through the wall and fell in another room right next to the old woman. When he fell, he demolished everything around him. The noise echoed throughout the entire market. In the resulting opening on the other side stood Kim-kun. He was watching the young man and what would happen next. A grandmother from a nearby restaurant with a Gulub Phi Gapsun, who was 72 years old, seeing everything that was happening, began to shout at Kim-kun for fighting again. The old man's assistant came into the room and said that it was just a remodeling and that he would repair that wall a little later. The old woman looked at the old man's assistant in surprise and said, "If this is true, then she hopes he will really fix it for her." Kim-kun walked up to the place where the young man had fallen. He picked up a chair and threw it back, but when he lowered his eyes, he saw no one. Kim-kun didn't understand what happened. Did this guy get scared and disappear from the place where he fell? The old woman shouted to her assistant that she didn't understand who this guy was next to her. When Kim-kun raised his head, he saw a young man who had taken an old woman hostage and was shouting for his opponent not to move, and if he made a move, then the old woman would die. Kim-kun folded his hands in front of him and asked the young man what he was doing, because it seemed to him not quite fair. Then the young man replied that he had simply taken this old woman hostage because he needed to set 3 minutes. He had very little time between blows, but he managed to think of something while he was lying on the floor. He had very little chance of escaping from a monster with such physical characteristics. And of course, it was impossible to win while he was simply being hit from different sides. So he realized that his only way to win this battle, it was to completely break the hostility, that he grabbed the grandmother and asked her to stay here for a while, presenting her with a knife to her throat. No matter how ruthless a killer Kim-kun was, he couldn't just stand by and watch his neighbor's grandmother die, even if she was harmed. The man who will become the first suspect is an unusual young man. He will become a man of weapons incarnate, that is, Kim-kun. The assistant stood and did not move anymore. He was confused. The young man thought that his plan had worked. It was unclear whether it was the lion or the hostage, but it still worked. The young man told the old lady to keep quiet and just behave quietly for the 3 minutes he needed to set. Kim-kun, after thinking it over, he said that this young man has very strong immune nerves and took a step forward. At that moment, the young man realized that his plan had failed and was not so successful. Kim-kun, when he came closer to the young man, the first thing he did was grab the hand that held the knife. He squeezed this hand with such force that the young man's hand first turned red and then began to shrink, and he could not hold the knife in it. After which he felt this unbearable pain again, and it seemed that every nerve in his body was screaming in pain. The knife that was in his hand fell out and fell to the floor. The initiative was back on Kim-kun's side. Now it was up to the assistant whether he would leave the young man alive or not. Without thinking twice, the assistant swung his huge fist and struck the young man from above. The young man was so scared that he looked at his opponent's fist and realized that he would experience pain once again. But the fist that had just struck him had different intentions from the previous one, and this blow was made with a completely different force. At that moment, the young man became very scared and was very afraid for his life. So he closed his eyes very tightly and thought only about one thing, that he would most likely die after this blow. At that moment, the old man said that 3 minutes had passed, and the assistant had not had time to deliver his last blow. After these words, the young man opened one eye and looked at his opponent. Now he needed to understand whether 3 minutes had really passed. An old man came up and said that 3 minutes had passed, and it was enough to beat the newbie. Kim-kun, without thinking twice, threw the young man to the side so that he flew and fell. After which the assistant approached the old woman and asked her how she felt and whether the grandmother was hurt. The old woman began to shout at him and said that her business was over. The old woman couldn't hold back and started beating Kim-kun. She screamed that he was a son of a bitch who had destroyed everything and that he was just an ordinary hooligan. Then she told him to quickly sort out everything he did. She scolded him, saying that he was also silent, impudent. She read and said that she would soon die with them if things continued like this. At that moment, the old man approached the young man and looked at him. He was pleased with what had happened. Unexpectedly for everyone, the old man began to take off the apron he was wearing, and he gave it to the young man, after which he said that from tomorrow the young man can go to work. When the young man took this apron in his hands, he was very happy. Could he really have done it? The young man fell to the floor with joy and began to roll around on the floor along with the apron that they gave him. The old man looked at this guy and did not understand why he was so happy, but he was still happy that he had another student. The old man told the young man that in his time, when he got a job in exactly the same way, it was customary to give a speech of thanks and words of gratitude, but the young man didn't even ask if he could lie here on the floor. The old man then told his assistant to take the young man to the hospital. The assistant took the young man by the leg and dragged him along. The old man asked him to take him in a more beautiful way, since he was now his junior assistant. Kim-kun did not carry the young man on his shoulder to the hospital, but he thought only of one thing, that in the entrance test for vegetables and fruits, Paklum was successfully passed. The young man, having come to his senses, was happy despite the fact that he felt quite bad. The old man approached the old woman who was raising the knife and asked why she so obediently played the role of a hostage. The grandmother, without turning around, answered him that it didn't matter at all. After the knife was in her hands, she asked the old man if this was really an interrogation. This old woman was a legend of the first generation, the inner ghost of the Phi Gangsun Company. She replied that she was still the eldest and should correspond to this level. Besides, she noticed that this boy had a sparkle in his eyes and he was not hopeless. And then she added that she perfectly understands how hard it is for this young man, and she wanted to help him. The old man noticed that his neighbor was very kind. At that moment, she said that she had one request for him. The old man must clean the store to a shine before he dies. In fact, the dark cleaners and killers are much closer to each other than it seemed. In everyone's life, the first job is the most responsible, like Arbat, a part-time job. Or if a person wants to get a job as a regular office worker, he must look 100%. Or even a regular promotion when a person goes from being an ordinary worker to being the head of a team and you start being led by them. In any of these cases, a person's condition on his first working day in a position is always very exciting. It's definitely so intense that it's impossible for these people to fall asleep before their first day of work. In fact, if it is so important for ordinary people, then one can understand how important it is for the employee of the murder department, Chan Po-tong, a newcomer who got a job as a killer. Indeed, the night before his first day of work, he couldn't fall asleep. So when he woke up, he looked at his tired face in the mirror. While brushing his teeth, he thought that work was work, of course, but perhaps on his first working day, he would be assigned his first murder. The young man caught himself thinking that of course he hates the ordinary, but he wants to do his job well, especially since he was recognized for the first time. After all, he took killer courses and he was the most talented in those courses. He then completed the 21st National Killer Accelerated course and graduated with honors. He was one of the best. After which, despite everything, he was able to get a job in his specialty and the poly license he received. And the most important thing is that he rose on his own. He passed the interview despite what happened to him. The young man spat toothpaste into the sink and caught himself thinking that he hadn't thought about any of this until recently. Even when he got this job, he didn't think about all this. He didn't think about killing. He closed his eyes and began to rub his temples with both hands. He thought that this way, he would be able to bring himself to his senses. After which he opened his eyes, looked at himself and thought if he had already ended up in the tiger's den, it was not too late to come to his senses, and he should turn on the simulator mode. He thought he should write a letter asking for some time to think things over. But on the other hand, he understood that the people he was connected with would come very quickly to finish him off, in which case he would definitely not live. He thought that if he didn't cross the line and didn't kill anyone, he would just say that he would work as a support staff. Then he realized that if he said that, he would probably be hanged for such jokes, and that could also end very badly for him. The young man walked around all morning and didn't understand what to do, how to act correctly. The alarm clock rang on his phone. The ringing was very loud, which meant good morning and the beginning of a new day for him. The young man looked at his phone and thought what would happen if he was late. Then he decided that in that case he would also be killed, and it was not worth doing. He decided that he should try to go. When he came to work, he realized that not everything was so bad, and there was a nice girl who looked at him. At that moment, he felt very awkward because he was standing with a broom and cleaning near the counter. He caught himself thinking that he had not slept all night, worrying about the fact that he would just have to clean. Everything he did since the morning was not at all like the work he had planned. He was just collecting boxes. Together with Kim Kun, who was counting these boxes, and the old man was saying that these boxes would contain everything, and he would also have apples. Then he and his assistant sorted apples. Kim Kun told him that rotten and dry apples should be thrown away. The young man caught himself thinking that he felt very awkward working with a man who had tried to kill him the day before. He understood that he was in such an atmosphere that he wanted to throw up. He thought about how he could get closer to Kim Kun. He couldn't even imagine what he could talk about with him. The young man tried to talk to the assistants. He said that the fruits they were sorting were so fresh they were probably chemical-free, to which the assistant replied that he doesn't know, he just wears them and sells them. Then the assistant said that he was not a farmer at all, and he could not understand such issues. The young man noted that he was right, and it was very difficult for him. He polished the apples for some time until they shone and seemed to dazzle the customers. The other part of the time, the young man was only busy with what he was doing near the shop, where they sold vegetables and fruits. He thought that this was a regular job at a fruit and vegetable stall. At some point, he even felt disappointed. So the young man decided to approach the old man and ask him what the job he was doing could be called. He asked him if this was some kind of training that he was doing all this time. The old man raised his eyes, looked at the young man, and said that he was talking complete nonsense. Could he really be white and overfed? The young man said that this is not true at all. In fact, in martial arts novels, there are scenes where the heroes spend several years simply washing floors or doing some kind of work. At first, it looks like a regular floor cleaning, but it turns out it was not like that at all. It was strength training. And usually the broom that sweeps is not for sweeping, but for pumping up your muscles. And this broom is also needed in order to learn how to use it, and in skilled hands it should stop being a tool. So the young man asked the old man if the work he was doing today was part of this training. The old man thought for a moment. The young man did not let him say a word. He continued to say that if he spoke about such things at the very beginning, it would not be entirely appropriate. The old man interrupted him and said that he was talking nonsense. Had he really hit his head somewhere and was repeating whatever came to mind? After which the old man took the newspaper and hit his new worker several times. He shouted at him not to even think that he could slack off from the first day. He had to clean everything thoroughly. And then he added that the delivery would arrive soon, so he had to get everything done before that. The young man thought for a very long time about what he was doing wrong and why his job was not the one he dreamed of. A car pulled up to their vegetable shop. A girl driver got out of it and she slammed the door. This girl came up to the store and shouted to the owner that she had arrived. The old man answered that he had a lot of customers now and that she should drop her things. Then he ordered her to take a cart and move everything together with his new employee. The young man thought that they were forcing a person who wanted to become a killer to do all sorts of nonsense. He found it very strange. The girl asked the owner again if he had really hired a person younger than Kim Kun. At that moment, she approached the young man and told him that they would see each other very often, so she should introduce herself as a representative of the wholesale vegetable and fruit store Suwa, and her name was Cheon Suwa. She was 27 years old. The girl said that she was the owner of the company Sukva, which had been supplying products to fruit stalls for 6 years, and extended her hand to him. The young man was very surprised, but he was glad to meet him. He said that his name was Chan Pathan. The young man thought that there must be a seller who conscientiously carries out the delivery. The girl told him that she would take out the boxes and he should put them in the cart. She also told him that the boxes were heavy, so he should be careful. Not to mention the customers, but most likely just because of the rumors about the popular fruit stand, local residents flocked to it. A police representative approached the old man and asked how his sales were going and what tasty things he had. The old man replied that the most delicious and sweet thing now was apples and offered him a box. The young man was very surprised because this old man was talking to the policemen, who were the ones to be feared the most. He thought it was somehow tense. The girl gave the young man one box. He barely held it. He thought that this box of apples was very heavy. When the young man couldn't hold on to this box and it fell on the floor, this box opened. And besides the apples, there were other objects in this box that the young man saw. He was a little scared and didn't understand what to do. In fact, along with these apples in this box, there was a weapon that crumbled in his hands. The young man was in shock. It was his first day at work, and he did not live up to his promise. He could not hold the box in his hands. The young man tried to fix everything quickly. He immediately dropped to the ground and tried to collect everything back into this box. The old man who was nearby didn't say anything. He didn't even show that something had happened. Kim-kun paid attention to what was happening, but was also calm. He wanted to see how well fed this guy could get out. The girl who brought all this was a little confused. She couldn't even imagine that something like this could happen. The police officers who were standing next to the old man turned their heads and looked at this young man collecting weapons in a box. The old lady from the neighboring restaurant was also surprised. This hadn't happened to them recently. Even the yard dog that was at this market was surprised. It froze and couldn't turn around. The girl couldn't think of anything else to say except that this box was really heavy. The assistant to the chief of police asked him if he was seeing the same thing as she was. The old man closed his eyes and said loudly, so that everyone could hear, that this guy was just a clumsy idiot. At that moment, the young man's eyes just went dark. He thought that first he just needed to collect everything he had dropped and then see how it goes. The young man was collecting all the weapons that were lying on the ground in one box. Police officers from both sides tried to approach him. The young man tried to feel sorry for himself as much as possible, because he thought that someone should help him at that moment. It seemed to him that he was about to die. He was sitting on the ground. I don't understand what to do. And next to him lay a pistol. The policeman who tried to approach him and find out what was going on did not expect such a turn of events. The young man threw the gun away from himself, and at that moment it fired. The bullet after this shot hit the policeman right in the leg. Blood spurted out. The policeman was in shock. After which the policeman fell to the ground, and the young man lay on it, also a little shocked by what was happening. He thought that this couldn't be, because he didn't really want this, and it just happened by itself. The police girl pointed her gun straight at the young man and told him to drop the weapon. He is a crazy killer and a smuggler, she shouted, that he is shooting at a police officer, is engaged in illegal arms trafficking. This is already beyond the pale. There was nothing left to do but raise both his hands up. In one, there was a knife, and in the other, a machine gun magazine. The policewoman was telling her boss that they needed to arrest this guy as soon as possible. She was saying that this young man could be faking. In response, her boss told her to put her gun down. The girl didn't understand why she had to do that. When she turned her head, she saw her boss standing with his hands up. The old man opened the pocket of his work clothes with one hand and put his hand. Kim-kun did the same. He opened his pocket and put his hand there. The boss told his assistant that she should do what he tells her, and he will then explain when to return to work. His assistant tried to return, but he said, did she really want to die right here? He ordered her that they should leave. The second policeman, who was lying on the ground, told the girl to put her gun down because his daughter was waiting for him at home. The chief and the girl lifted another policeman, put him on his feet, and started to leave. The old man approached the police chief and told him to forgive him because he was a new officer and not yet trained enough, and handed him a box of apples. The boss said that Chairman Kim was ready to make concessions. He doesn't want to die at all, so they'll just turn a blind eye. And then he added, if these kids get hurt again, I think he will have problems too. After which all three police officers very quickly left the market. The old man stood silently for a while watching the policeman leave. He didn't feel like that. After which the old man turned and approached the young man. The young man was a little confused. Unexpectedly for the young man himself, the old man swung and hit him in the face with all his might, so that the young man came to his senses. Immediately after this, the old man told the young man that he was fired. He did not say anything more and did not want to mess with him anymore. The young man was a little confused as he was fired on his first day at work. The young man stood silently and could not say anything. He was very upset that his first day ended like this. The old man began to swear as never before. We call the young man an idiot, who not only got himself into trouble but also endangered them all. Kim-kun and the supplier of the goods stood silently watching what would happen next, because they had just almost gotten into trouble because of this guy. The old man approached the young man and said that he was most likely a fool and did not understand what kind of industry he had gotten into. The old man got so carried away that he started shouting that he had made a mistake when he hired him. He shouted at the young man to leave immediately because he didn't want to see him anymore. The young man was very upset and had no choice but to quit his first job on his very first working day. He didn't understand how it could happen that he was kicked out on the very first day, because at some point he already believed in himself and his talent. He thought about what kind of entry could there be in his work record that he was fired on the first day, and whether everything that happened to him was really true. He thought that he got this job due to certain circumstances and nothing more. He never thought he had a special affinity for a job that involved killing people. However, when he was training, he thought about it more than once and did not know how to explain it all. In fact, this was his first case in which he put all his efforts. But the mental wound turned out to be much greater than he himself expected. He thought that a lot of events had happened in one day. It all didn't fit in his head. However, one could say for sure that he was kicked out of the company that said that he was special and not ordinary. He was walking down the street and thought that now he had become an ordinary, simple loser, the same as he had been before when he was still studying. His phone rang. He took out his phone and saw that it was Chairman Jackman calling him. The young man pressed the green button and brought the phone to his ear. Said that he was listening. The chairman said that he was very close and decided to call him. He suggested celebrating his employment. The young man had no choice but to agree with the chairman's proposal, and they went to the place where the meeting was scheduled. Despite what happened, he didn't tell him. He decided that he should meet. The thug who was always with the chairman and his teacher asked to be served in Korean. The chairman said that his assistant ordered it because this guy treats people. The young man looked at the chairman's assistant and complimented him on how he ordered food just like a real Korean. The chairman was even happy that the young man was pouring him alcohol. He said that it was wonderful that his student was pouring him alcohol. The chairman then took a sip of alcohol and then asked the young man how he was doing at work. At that moment, the young man lowered his head and began to explain something incoherently. Then he gathered his courage and said that he had been kicked out. When the chairman heard these words from the young man, he became very upset and started shouting what kind of things this was and why he was kicked out. The young man lowered his head and began to tell that there was a policeman there, and he fired a shot completely by accident. The traitor did not understand what kind of excuse this was. Was he really caught while working? Then the young man said that it wasn't work. He was just carrying a box of fruit and dropped it, and there was a weapon inside. And while he was assembling this weapon, the gun went off. It was completely by accident. At that moment, the chairman threw a plate that was standing on the table with food towards the young man and hit him right in the face. He swore at this guy very loudly. The chairman's blow was strong enough and the guy flew off the table. The chairman was so upset that he even turned red from everything that was happening, and he started yelling at the guy that he was just a jerk. He was most upset that this young man did not live up to his expectations because he introduced him to his respected teacher and he dared to make a mistake. He saw the chairman's furious face in front of him and heard how he would say that the young man should simply die. At that moment, the young man thought that if he said that he was fired, he would definitely be beaten, so he closed his eyes. That's why he started saying that, to put it briefly, it was his carelessness that he didn't want to tell the whole truth. He started making excuses about how, to be honest, his head was filled with a lot of things, and he was given some trivial job. The feeling that his life was moving in an unexpected direction for him. He didn't understand what he was doing here. He couldn't get his head together. Unexpectedly for the young man, the chairman said that such mistakes happen to everyone. And he also made such mistakes when he was just starting out. He was also full of enthusiasm and confused his goals. The chairman said that his assistant accidentally stepped on his grandfather's foot and even tried to pay his hospital bills. The chairman took a few sips and said that he was not at all angry with the young man for his mistakes. Then he put his glass down abruptly and in a completely different voice told the young man that there was another. What makes me very angry and his irresponsible attitude, and pointed a finger at him. The chairman said that firstly, he did not appreciate this morning and got a job. The chairman said that the young man, not even mentioning the murder, took on the responsibilities under his own pressure, does not know exactly what he wants. This could tarnish both his reputation and the reputation of his teacher, and for the chairman it was certainly a disgusting act. Then the chairman said that secondly, if he made any mistake and he should have apologized and asked to give him another chance, if he had even the slightest feeling of regret and a desire to continue this work. The young man thought that the chairman's words were the pure truth. He didn't know what he was thinking when he went to this job. He tried to remember, but everything was like a fog. He wanted to prove to some people that he was capable of something. After all, in fact, he himself came to these courses in order to get this license, and when he heard that these were killer courses, he did not leave there. Then he got a job as a killer on his own, and he didn't refuse it and went out the next day. After all, in reality, no one forced him and there was no compulsion in any way. It was entirely his decision. At that moment, he was thinking only about one thing, that he didn't want to be an ordinary person. He wanted to be recognized, but he acted like a tough guy who did something he didn't want to do. And all this led to a mistake, who from the very moment he shot the policeman, and this mistake led to his dismissal. Well, at that moment, unexpectedly for himself, the young man thought that this is what he wants to do, and from that moment he decided that he needed to start all over again. He thought that he never wanted to forget all these warm memories of the counter, especially since they never existed. The young man unexpectedly told the chairman that he was offering his apologies, at which point he stood up from the table. The chairman looked at the young man and thought that it looked like this guy wasn't a complete idiot, after which he took a glass of alcohol and took a few sips. Oh, at that moment the chairman stood up from the table and said that he was still not the person to whom he should apologize. Then he put on his jacket and said that they needed to go to the teacher now, and he should have apologized to him. The chairman's assistant said something in Korean to the waitress. He ordered another kimchi stew and quickly. The chairman told his assistant that he just needed to eat it all quickly and leave, and then asked him if he really wanted to ruin a guy who didn't even have a job. The chairman ironed his new shirt and jacket before going to the teacher. He blew Zoom ball. You look perfect. Very soon these three stood before the old man with their heads down, asking him to give the young man a chance. The old man looked at the three of them and didn't understand why he should give this guy another chance. The old man said, why give him another chance even though the chairman is his student and he is asking for him? This guy has gone far beyond the limits. He said that because of this guy a serious incident occurred. He shot at a government official at his workplace. The old man didn't understand whether he should trust this guy and give him another chance. The chairman raised his head. The guy's head dropped even lower. He said so that the teacher would believe him, because he wouldn't ask for just anyone. The chairman said that if a young man has done something wrong, then he doesn't need to be given free opportunities. He needs to be assigned a task and see how he copes with it. The old man asked his student again if he really needed to give him assignments right away. He was categorically against giving him tasks. He didn't understand why they would give work to a person who couldn't even carry a box. The chairman said that if something goes wrong, he will take responsibility for it. And this blockhead whom he trained demanded that the old man put pressure on him properly. The chairman smiled and said that it would be great if the old man gave him a very difficult task to restore the trust lost after that incident. A serious task was needed. The old man looked at his student and wondered if he was really ready to answer for this guy, if he was just standing on stage and saying all sorts of scary things. Then the old man turned his head and looked at his assistant and asked him to choose the most difficult and cheapest task from all the requests. His assistant also found the task. It was really quite difficult. It was not expensive at all. The old man dismissively threw the task on the floor to the young man and told him to take it, and then the old man added that he didn't know how it would work out. Well, it was hardly possible, but if this guy succeeded, he would pretend that there was no mistake. The young man picked up the check that had the writing on it, but he didn't understand everything that was written there. He didn't understand what a dragon fruit was, what it meant. He grabbed his head and thought that all this was impossible. The chairman said that in the store, the teacher dragon fruit is a word denoting the leader of the gang, and the church happy dragon fruit, and 120 million, all this meant the cost of the order. Only after this did the young man think that what this all meant to me was that they were asking to kill the leader of the happy gang for 120 million won. The young man remembered the sect of Happy High PP, which raised their hands up and together with their leader Beer Song in order to be cured of all diseases and did not demand donations from the whole family. The young man looked at his phone and saw what this sect looked like. The chairman showed him. Then the chairman pointed to the man and said that he was the target and that it was definitely hard work. The chairman added that maybe it looks funny, well, extortion of property of believers, kidnapping of celebrities, illegal substances, brainwashing of children, fraud, sexual slavery. He was the leader of a sect that accumulated assets in the amount of 180 billion won. I do everything in a row that brings profit. And most likely this head of the sect has made a lot of enemies committing such dirty crimes. In fact, there have already been many attempts and all ended in failure. It seems this caused him trauma. That's why now this sect leader has dozens of bodyguards who are ready to sacrifice everything for him and every month he spends hundreds of 1 million just on his security. The chairman said that this was a very difficult goal for a newcomer. He asked the young man if he could handle it. At that time, the young man looked at those people who were singing along with the head of the sect and at their happy faces. The guy, without raising his eyes, replied that he had to try because the chairman believed in him. And the young man also said that he likes it and he does it because it is his decision. He said that if they eventually kill him, he will take this guy with him, in which case he will not be ashamed to lie in a coffin. The chairman was very pleased to hear such words from his student. He thought that he was not mistaken about him. He threw away the cigarette he was smoking and told one person that they would send him a message with the target's movement, detailed information, and a plan. Until that moment, until he receives all the information, he must gather his determination. Then he looked at the young man and added that killing people is not so easy. The young man, unexpectedly even for himself, shouted out that he agreed with every word of the chairman. After which he turned around abruptly and started running away. He went home to gather strength and prepare himself. At that moment, an old man approached the chairman and his student and asked him if he really thought that this guy could succeed. Well, after that, he added that a total of 8 security service employees are located around the clock near the target that needs to be destroyed. Among these employees, the entry is considered the lowest rank. There is a bodyguard of Class A. This bodyguard never leaves his target for a second. He is constantly near him 24/7. Bodyguard Class A is codename and clairvoyant. The cost of the services he provides is 25 million won per week. In the assassin training school, the level of newly graduated assassins rarely exceeds Class C, which is the lowest, so this young man doesn't have the slightest chance of completing this mission. Everything that happened simply didn't make any sense. The bodyguards who were near the target would kill the young man as soon as he showed himself. The old man told his student that he had not shown goodwill at all. And then he added that the chairman threw out this young man and his last chance to return to the world of ordinary people. He is the worst teacher. After these words, the chairman smiled and answered his teacher that he did not agree with him at all. He said that this guy would succeed. He disagrees with the old man for only one reason. This guy has one very strong side, and that side is ordinariness. The clairvoyant who guarded the mentor and the target that the young man was supposed to destroy did not leave him for a second. Even when he was leaving his office, this bodyguard was next to him because he was worried that there might be a killer among the fans. The followers of this sect, when they saw the mentor, they were happy with each of them. They were ready to take at least one step closer to the mentor or receive his blessing. At this moment, the mentor of this sect was already under the gun and they were ready to destroy him. He was held at gunpoint by Kim Kun, who was on one of the roofs of a high-rise building so that he could clearly see his target. Kim Kun was as cool as ever. He knew his job and therefore waited for the moment when it needed to be done. He looked at his watch. It was exactly 12 o'clock and they were talking about Piccoli. This was the moment when he would need to complete the task. Before this, the old man told him that it was not yet clear what kind of fruit this boy was who came to them to get a job. But if he tried to kill the sect mentor, then most likely he would do it the next day at noon. The old man said so because there was only one day when the leader came out of his bunker. He came out at noon to meet with fans. Old man Stephen took this order by hand, so he couldn't let this guy who was assigned to work for him and who he wasn't sure about fail this task. Kim Kun kept his finger on the trigger. He needed a few more seconds to finish this job. Before this, the old man told him that if this guy was talking about this matter, then Kim Kun would have to kill both of them with his own hands. It was better than being caught and forced to divulge secret information. The cult leader's fans were delighted. They shouted for him to look at them and illuminate them with light there. Happy, happy, one of the young men said that he made a t-shirt with the leader's image. While this mentor was standing on the red carpet, there were many bodyguards around him. His fans were shouting that they loved him. The clairvoyant bodyguard came closer to the mentor and told him to forgive him for detaining him. But such events as an autograph session and everything else are a little inconvenient for them bodyguards. He wanted to offer him something, but the leader of the Edo sect did not hear him at all and did not want to listen. The bodyguard told him that as a Class A bodyguard, he would only allow contact after a thorough check, at which point he scanned the man completely. The leader answered him that they should organize such fan sessions so that these fools would go crazy over him. Donations will continue to accumulate, and Mr. Clairvoyant will receive a salary and will not be a bread and butter. After which the leader told him that he should do a scan or something like that and introduce him to some reliable guys and should not give him any more strange advice. After which the leader stepped forward, raised his hands above his head, and began to tell all the believers in him that today is a happy, happy day, and they should all observe the order and choose a few people for him to give them an autograph for only 5,700,000 won. The bodyguard looked at the leader and thought that this swindler he was guarding was behaving like a common bastard, but while he was paying him a lot of money, that's why he was working for him. The bodyguard knew that his scans would not only reveal hidden weapons on a person, but would also calculate potential physical abilities based on skeletal structure and muscle mass. It was this ability that saved the leader's life so many times, and he actually boasts about money. It was an ordinary fool. The bodyguard thought of someone to scan. He looked at the girl who was closest. Her physical ability score was 30 points. She had a permanent marker and a t-shirt. She was just safe. So the bodyguard shouted to the girl who believed in the leader to come forward. The girl shouted, "Hooray!" The next person the bodyguard looked at and scanned was an old woman. Her physical ability score was 15 points. She had holy water happy in a bottle. She was completely safe, he shouted to her, the believing lady, to come out. The next moment, the bodyguard decided that he needed to scan someone from the crowd that came to see their leader, and he thought that this person must be a man. Having chosen one of the guys and having scanned him, he saw that the assessment of physical abilities was a young man, and it was 61 points. The assessment was very high. He was dangerous. The bodyguard looked at this guy, pointed his finger at him, and told the other bodyguards not to let this guy get close to the leader, and told the guy that if he got too close and the guards would push him away. The bodyguard understood that he only chose women, and that was a problem. He needed a man. That's why a young man caught his eye. His physical ability score was average, and it was 50 points. He only had a pen for an autograph and a wallet with cash. The bodyguard made a choice that this guy was the most ordinary and did not pose a threat. He thought that he was safe, so he pointed his finger at him and said that this particular guy might be suitable, and the bodyguard ordered all the other believers to clear the way for those who were named so that they could approach the leader. The bodyguard told his mentor and leader that these people did not pose any threat. He told the leader to go to those three, and then they would disperse the fans, and he could immediately get into the car. The leader of this sect approached the girl, and she asked him to put his autograph right on the t-shirt on her chest. At this point, the bodyguard told all his other subordinates to gradually disperse the crowd and open the car doors, and also to check whether the signals were coordinated in the area where the car would pass. The rest of the security started approaching the people who had gathered and telling them to disperse and sign up for the next meeting. People were a little upset because they couldn't get in. Another part of the guard was near the car, which was waiting for the leader to get into it. One of the guards shouted to the others and the head bodyguard that the signal coordination was ready. The bodyguard, nicknamed the Clairvoyant, thought that this was great. Now only VIPs can get into the set. The bodyguard told the mentor to get into the car. Time for communication with people was over. But the mentor did not react to the words of the bodyguard. He was very indignant because this leader stood and counted the money he received for the autograph right there on the spot. The bodyguard extended his hand, placed it on the mentor's shoulder, and told him to get into the car immediately. But the bodyguard didn't have time to do anything before he saw that red spots appeared on the mentor's white jacket in the area of the heart, and he began to fall. The only thing that showed up on this bodyguard's display was that something bad had happened. The mentor fell to his knees. Blood was spreading across his perfectly white suit. He was damaged in 2 places. At that moment, the clairvoyant bodyguard realized that an emergency had occurred. The rest of the guards surrounded this mentor who was wounded and barely sat down. One of the guards shouted that an ambulance needed to be called quickly. He grabbed the phone and started calling. The clairvoyant bodyguard understood that the bleeding could not be stopped so easily, but he did not understand how many holes there were in the mentor's chest. This was clearly the work of an experienced killer. But the most unclear thing was how it happened. Where and from where the shot was fired. No one understood anything. Thanks to his scanning, dangerous objects were excluded. Kim Kun watched everything that was happening at that moment and simply swallowed his saliva. Kim Kun stood up from his position and clearly saw everything that happened. These were quick and precise movements in a split second. The young man struck his mentor several times with the pen that was in his hand and thus dealt him a fatal blow. It was partly an innate skill and partly an advanced skill. He had the speed, precision, and composure that cannot be considered the skills of a beginner. Kim Kun thought, of course, any experienced killer could do this, but he was not an experienced killer at all but a newbie. Well, the only thing that Kim Kun didn't understand in this situation was how all this could have happened to him and how he did it all. How could he get into a certain situation to achieve his goal? Because it was not easy for others. And most importantly, he did not understand how this young man, who was a newcomer in their industry, was able to close the distance without arousing any suspicion. He came with everyone else, stood unnoticed among this crowd, raised his hands just like them and shouted something. Kim-kun took aim again, but this time not at the leader but at the young man, because the old man said to take out two. He looked at the running young man and understood that what he had done right now before his eyes could be considered top class. That's why Kim-kun lived to see Siva. The old man said that he understood and asked his assistant to clean up there and then come back. At that moment, the chairman turned around and told his teacher that he had warned him about his student, and he laughed loudly and said that he was a good student and that he brought the same good students to the teacher's store. The old man admitted that he didn't even think that anything could come of this guy. He said that he highly appreciated his kindness, but that was far from all. The old man was very curious why he couldn't achieve such results with Kim-kun, although he really wanted to. At that moment, the chairman approached the box in the hall, the most beautiful apple in his hands, and looked at it. After which he said that of course this is the teacher's job. This young man is much weaker than Kim-kun, the best class of killer. But Kim-kun is more like a strong bulldozer that blows up and kills everything in a row. Of course, it is clear that if something happens, he will certainly use his skills to destroy and neutralize everything. This is the kind of bulldozer he is talking about. And this young man, he is completely different at that moment. The chairman began to wipe the apple that he took from the box. He said that if you compare statistics, the indicators will not exceed the average value of the killer. All his indicators will be average and he will be the same average killer. But to be honest, a guy like Chong Po-thon is a poison without light and smell, and also a sting that does not dazzle. He can be called a high ladder in the middle of the night. If we compare the abilities of Kim-kun and the newcomer there, it is not clear whose indicators are much closer to the talent of murder. After which the chairman took a bite of his apple and told his teacher to think about his words. Because this young man is just a genius who makes murder look like murder. He is like Steve Jobs, who turned an ordinary phone into a smartphone. The old man looked to the side and told the chairman that as soon as he remembered, he would appear here. This concerned the young man. The young man came closer to them and without holding back his emotions, said that he had done it. He had completed the task. Then he went up to the old man, lowered his head, and once again asked for forgiveness for what happened last time. He said that he would be grateful if he gave him another chance. Then the young man raised his head. He wanted to know how the old man would react to this and whether he would be able to take him. The old man, unexpectedly for everyone, began to speak something indistinctly and then said that an agreement is more important than money, and he said that Chong Po-thon was restored. Mr. Chong Po-thon was congratulated on his first mission by a Class B killer from the Assassination Association. His code name was Postman. The young man could barely contain his emotions, but he said thank you. He was very surprised that someone from the association came to congratulate him. This person from the association said that in connection with the execution of a task in which a Class A guard was present, as well as the processing of a highly dangerous target with a guard of 5 or more people. In connection with all this, the association certifies him as a Class C killer and issues him such a certificate. He then spoke about the advantages of this class. This is that he has a 5% discount on rice ice cream in collaboration with the Killer Association, as well as 2% cashback when visiting various attractions to relieve stress, a gift certificate for $20,000 in a bookstore to improve the cultural level, and much more. The killer from the association said that full information about the benefits can be found on the official website. He got back on his motorcycle and started to move. The killer told the young man that the association has high hopes for Mr. Potcon, and he should remember this all the time. After which the killer waved his hand at the young man, said goodbye, and very quickly disappeared from his field of vision. The young man held a Class C killer card in his hand and thought that the guy who had just congratulated him had disappeared very quickly. The young man is very surprised by such words as congratulations, we look forward to it. You did a good job. He has never heard anything like that in his life. These words simply made his head spin, and he even felt uneasy. He raised his hands and shouted loudly that murder was the best thing that had happened in his life and that killers were the best profession. Whose voice was it from behind that told the young man that she had heard that he had completed his first mission and received a certificate? It was an old lady from a nearby restaurant. She was also happy for the young man. Unexpectedly for himself, the young man did not understand how the old woman could find out about everything. He came closer to her and asked if she already knew about it. The old woman replied that it was just the guy from the association who had given him the ID. The young man thought that it was worse that the old woman already knew everything perfectly well, and he did something wrong again. Like it was last time with the policeman he shot and he fell down bleeding. Kim Kun intervened in this conversation. He said that this old woman was a first-class veteran in the world of murder. The young man was simply in shock. According to the current standard, this is the title that is used as this moon for S-class killers. The old lady laughed and started saying that, oh my God, what a first-class veteran her current appearance is, and that was a long time ago. The old lady told the young man that she was not the only one here. Many stall owners at this market were people from this industry. She started talking about the butchers who are here, namely about Mr. Choi. And also from this branch of fishmongers, Mr. Yan is a very nice and smiling man. Also from this industry, Mr. Pak is the one who owns the hardware store. The old lady said that she doesn't remember the others. You need to look at the phone book provided by the association. In fact, it looks more like a village of murderers. At that moment, the young man thought that the vegetables and fruits of Poknam in this market were not just like that. He turned to the old woman. Did she really allow him to take her hostage during the entrance test? The old lady said that it was just her kind heart as an industry veteran and patted the young man on the shoulder with her hand. He thanked the old lady and said if it weren't for her, he would hardly have passed this test. She answered him that if he wanted to thank her, then as soon as he finished, he could come to her. She needed help. She pointed to a large number of boxes standing near her counter and said that today was radish pickling day. The young man never knew that radishes could be pickled, so he asked her again what kind of pickling was that. He looked at this old woman and could not imagine her as a first-class killer with a gun in her hands. This day at his workplace was usually spent outside. It was getting dark and trading at the market was ending. So the young man turned to the old man he was working with and thanked him for leaving him there. He went to a nearby restaurant because he promised an old lady that he would help her pickle radishes that evening. When I opened the door of this restaurant, it was already dark because the restaurant was located on the territory of the market, and it was already closed. The young man tried to shout to understand where he should go and where the old woman was, but no one answered him. He went to the cash register and saw that there were many photographs on the wall and began to look at them. These were completely ordinary photos of her with a girl and also with some other guys. The young man thought that it was very difficult for him to believe that this was the place where a former first-class killer lived. Everything was very nice. She took a few steps and saw something incomprehensible fall out of the door. He lowered his eyes down. He took another step forward and looked at what it was, but it was hard to see in the darkness. Since the conversation had been only about murders lately, he saw in this object a severed human hand. He couldn't hold back. He screamed and started swearing. He didn't expect such a turn of events. In reality, the scream began to come out very slowly. The old woman first appeared, a knife, and then she was all. The old lady was ambivalent. She asked who was swearing in her store. The young man lowered his head before the old woman and asked her for forgiveness. He didn't know how he couldn't hold back. He started to say whether she was angry because he didn't know her well, or whether the hostage-taking left a bad memory. Despite the fact that she was offended, the young man said that he still asked her for forgiveness. He did not raise his eyes. The old woman didn't understand what was going on, so she asked the young man if he was acting like that because he didn't want to help her. The guy raised his head, looked at her, and replied that it was not so. Then the old woman told him to stop talking nonsense and bring her some radishes, because it was hard for her to bend over because of her back. At that moment, the light fell on the very object that flew out, and the young man saw in front of him not a human hand, but an ordinary radish. The old lady added that despite her bad back, her hands were still dexterous, so he should go in faster. She told the houseman to quickly clean her radishes and put the greens separately as she does it. The old woman said that at this time she would mix the spices and make a sauce for marinating. The young man took a knife in his hands and began to cut the radish into small round pieces. Without raising her eyes, the old woman asked the young man if he was happy with his job as a killer. The guy was a little confused, but he told her that he was really happy with everything. The old woman told him not to cut himself while he was answering her questions. She would let him go as soon as he did everything. The young man continued to work at that moment. He answered her questions. He said that everything suited him, especially since he had never received praise before. And Timon added that if he doesn't work as a killer, what else could suit him? He doesn't know what else he could do. The old lady said that it is quite normal to be proud of yourself to some extent, and in the end, a killer is also a profession. And the killer himself is a contradictory person who makes a living by killing people. At that moment, she was mixing her sauce. She added that if they start building their own philosophy, they will avoid the direct perception of what they are doing. In that case, you can become not a killer but a monster, which is called a serial killer, so the young man needs to be careful. The guy told her that he would mean what she had just told him while he continued cutting the radishes. The old woman licked her finger that had the remains of the sun on it and said that it came out very well and the sauce was delicious. And then she added that he should wait a little. She would now help him cut the radish, but she would first drag this sauce to the side. When she tried to lift the box of sauce, something crunched in her spine. The old woman fell and started screaming in pain. The young man didn't understand what was happening and was a little confused. The old woman was lying on the floor writhing in pain, screaming that her back hurt a lot. The young man told her to be a little more careful and asked her not to come up to him because he would do it better himself. A young man holding a knife in one hand tried to approach the old woman to help her. At that moment, a red-haired girl entered the room. This girl was the granddaughter of this old woman, the granddaughter of Phi Gapsun, and she was the youngest active killer with class. The situation she saw when she entered this room was the following, so you could see the reaction on her face. She saw that her grandmother, the only member of her family, was lying on the floor, covered in blood, which reminded her that this guy had killed a man. In front of her grandmother stood an unknown young man. In his hands was a knife. The young man smiled and said that the old woman should not call herself a first-class master, that she should be careful and that he would do it better. In the end, after what she saw, she realized that this guy hurt her grandmother. She started screaming that he was crazy and he should get away from her grandmother. The young man turned his head and didn't understand what was happening. He asked who the girl was and why she was screaming. Right in front of the girl's feet, a sharp axe lay in a case. Everything indicated that she was about to take it. Indeed, the very next second, the girl bent down and took the axe into her hands. Her eyes were bloodshot. She was furious. She screamed that she was the granddaughter of this old woman, and he, the idiot, had to step aside, and besides, she would kill him today anyway. The young man was simply in shock. He did not understand what was being discussed and why she was so furious. The young man looked at the old woman who was lying on her side with her eyes closed and saying nothing. At that moment, he really looked like a killer holding a knife in one hand. He looked up and looked at the lamp that was constantly blinking, and it looked even more like the price of murder. He tried to tell the girl who came into this room not to talk nonsense, that she got it all wrong. But the old woman's granddaughter didn't even listen to this guy. She swung an axe to strike. She started to smash everything. The young man barely managed to escape Tessa's bosom from this blow, as his granddaughter was already ready to strike again. The next moment she swung and again missed. The young man managed to dodge this blow again. This went on for quite a long time. She was smashing everything around, and he only had time to jump away from her blows to the side. The next moment, he flew out of this restaurant straight onto the street, where there were counters of other shops and stalls. Despite the fact that their battles had taken a completely different trajectory, the girl was not going to stop. She dealt him blow after blow, and the young man only managed to dodge these blows to the side. He did not understand how to stop her. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she was bloodthirsty. She was ready to go to the very end. He tried to tell her that this was a common misunderstanding. It was just a very banal misunderstanding. He said that he just came to the kitchen to help. The girl answered him, "If this is an elderly man who has little time left, did he really decide to help her leave this world in this way?" She told him that up until that moment, she thought he was just weird, but now she was sure he was just completely crazy. At that moment, the little man realized that he had just gotten into trouble. This girl was not going to listen to him and understand him. At that moment, he realized that in a literal figurative sense, he had attracted her attention, and she saw him as her victim. He extended his hand forward and told her to stop and listen to what he had to tell her. The girl, despite everything, was not going to stop. She pushed off and began to approach the young man to strike. She took a few steps forward and swung her huge axe, ready to cut this guy in half. Well, something went wrong. The green radish leaves tied together in one rope began to slow down the girl's body. This rope, made of radish greens, tied the girl's hands and feet so that she could not stand and fell to the ground. The girl raised her head, looked, and was surprised that it was only on all the radish stems. At that moment, an old woman intervened in their showdown. She said that they were both crazy and asked them to stop smashing her kitchen. They had done all sorts of things. She said she wanted to take a pickled radish and shove it up both of their asses. The girl was in bewilderment because she saw her grandmother and she exclaimed, "Aren't you dead?" The old lady told her that she was too young to kick the bucket and didn't understand what kind of nonsense she was talking. Her back was just locked up, and besides, she told her to run ahead of the locomotive with such a fiery temperament. The young man was glad his life was safe. He realized that this old lady was something else. She turned to the young man and said, "Can't he handle one girl and make a mess in the kitchen?" She got angry because he was trashing her kitchen for the second time. The old woman told the young man to leave and immediately clean up her kitchen. Otherwise, this time she would definitely kill him. Two young people were carefully cleaning the kitchen because they were the ones who had destroyed it. They didn't talk to each other. They just thought it was all because of her. When they started cleaning the kitchen, the young man tried to lift the table, but he couldn't because the table was very heavy and his back hurt. The girl told him the table was so heavy because he was an ordinary weakling. The guy didn't understand why she said that. He looked at her again and realized that her hair had become normal, not like it was when she attacked him. When she gets angry, her hair stands on end and seems to fly in different directions. The old woman seemed to read the young man's thoughts. She said that when something related to family or blood happens, her granddaughter's hair immediately stands on end, and her mind remembers the young man. The old woman didn't know why this was happening, probably because she didn't have a father, a mother, and the young man didn't understand what she was saying and why she was talking about it so simply. The old lady told this guy that she could tell about something that really wasn't there because it wasn't there. She swung her fist to hit him on the head. The young man asked her to calm down. The old lady said that in any case, her granddaughter never had such a character as she shows it. All this happened when her parents were killed in front of her eyes, and she saw it all clearly and remembered it perfectly. And she also clearly remembered the person who did all this, and after he did it, he started taking pictures. As he was taking the photo, he heard a little girl crying coming from behind a closed door. She then hid in the toilet. This killer said that he had high expectations, but they were not met. He looked at it and said that he thought it would be a work of art. But in the end, it was all ordinary because the game is not at that level. He grabbed the girl's hand and thought that it was a souvenir. He asked her if she wouldn't think about him when she looked at this picture. When he left, he said that one day when she becomes a work of art, then at that moment let her come to him. He will wait for her. She drew his face many times and then painted over it with a black marker. Every time she said that she would kill him, she would kill him. She thought he was a crazy idiot who killed her parents. The old lady said if all this had not happened before her eyes, she would have lived a normal life and would not have ended up in the world of murderers. Then she added that she was very worried because she was afraid that she would not have the courage to do such work. The old lady wanted to have a cool and reliable partner. At that moment, she looked at the young man. He didn't understand what she was getting at and why she was telling him about her partner. The old woman said that the young man received approval from Weakling and he expects a lot from the young man. She said that he was able to catch the target that was controlled by the bodyguard of the class, so he is really cold-blooded. And surely, when Kim Kun was chasing him, he was carelessly thinking about how to take her hostage. The young man said that it was something like luck, something like good fortune. The old lady told him to stop being modest. He was just a bastard. If he had caused such a mess, he should be thanked for something else. The young man unexpectedly for himself said about the radish. He said that he could also peel and soak it. The old lady couldn't help herself. She turned the sauce over and screamed at the young man, pointing her finger at him and saying that he would be her granddaughter's partner. The young man shouted that no, he was grateful and had to repay the favor, but he didn't want to work for the man who had just tried to take his life. He looked at the girl and thought that, in addition, her ardor with which she takes on the task does not suit him at all. He thought that this girl was like a walking time bomb. You don't know when it will explode? He looked at her. She couldn't fit the broken stone into the wall. It was like putting a puzzle in the wrong place. At that moment, the young man was thinking about only one thing, what to come up with, and what reason to find for which he should refuse. He started to say that this request seemed absurd. He said that he thought that his boss would be against it. First of all, he is an employee at the Poknam counter. The tasks set by the boss are a priority for him. At this point, the old man intervened in the conversation and said that it made absolutely no difference to him and that they could work together. At that moment, the young man almost exploded. He did not understand what the old man was saying and why. The old man hit his fist on his forehead and said that it was just a why-shki and he was an ordinary brat. He began to explain to him that, firstly, the class rarely receives individual requests for a team. At least two are needed. He can screw up alone because cheap tricks won't always work. Then the old man said that he didn't know what to come up with, but everything turned out well and handed him the next check. He told him to go and do it together with his grandmother's granddaughter. The young man wanted to turn to the teacher, but he didn't let him say anything. In the hands of the young man was the very same check which stated that he should go to the restaurant Rajogi. Now he needed to talk to the girl and somehow find a solution to this problem. After some time, they were both in the restaurant where they were sent. The girl and the young man were sitting at the same table. She was very outraged that they were offered cooperation. She asked if she didn't want to. What would they do? The young man said that he also had no desire to work with someone who wanted to kill him, but there was no way out, her grandmother asked him, and the boss also said that they should work together. He picked up the check that was in his hand and said that they had no other choice but to calmly resolve this matter and go their separate ways. The girl thought that it seemed like he himself wasn't suitable for this industry for her father, and he wasn't strong. She didn't understand why her grandmother made her work with this guy. He really irritated her. On the contrary, the young man tried to pretend that he liked all this, because as a mature person, he had to endure it. After she finished her speech, he said that she had enough chatter and that she should listen carefully to the mission he had entrusted her with. Excel was the owner of the Rajogi meat restaurant. His name was Wang Chung-bi. This man was the one who kidnaps people, kills them, and then sells them for meat. In plain English, the restaurant owner was an ordinary serial killer. Even though everyone knew he was 100% guilty, no one could catch him red-handed. Thanks to his yerky employees, he was never caught off guard. He always came out clean. Therefore, the people who followed him could never catch him with a spa or catch him at the scene of a crime. How many times did they try to search his refrigerators? But he always hid everything very carefully. Therefore, every time after such cafes that ended in nothing, he and his employees were happy that everything went like clockwork. A long investigation was conducted. The detectives were no longer able to watch the appearance of new victims. It was then that the detectives raised money and hired them. When the young man told all the detailed information, he said that this is the content of their mission. The detectives say that they will be covered if they succeed, so it is a simple mission where you only need to kill one person and get your money. Then the young man said that first they need to conduct their own investigation despite the information they already know. The girl raised her eyes and asked what kind of investigation they were doing and why they were going to conduct it. Then the young man said that it was impossible to get close to the owner of this restaurant, Wang Chung-bi. If they did something wrong, they could end up surrounded by his employees and become just pieces of meat. He said that he had figured out the best way to find out when Wang Chung-bi finishes work and what time he goes to work. Then they need to find out when he is alone and take the opportunity to kill him. The girl listened to the young man and said that it all sounded convincing and that he was much smarter than he seemed at first glance. Then the young man stood up and said if she had finished eating, then it was time for them to go to the restaurant where they sell human meat. After some time, they were in the very restaurant where they sell human meat. Right before their eyes, this meat was being prepared for them on the grill. The man who was frying this meat said that everything was fine for the young people. Bon appétit. The girl and the young man sat looking at this portion of meat and were afraid to start eating it. It was clear from their faces that they were worried. The girl lowered her head and asked the young man in a whisper if he would really eat this, since this could also be human flesh. The young man answered her what they should do. They need to get information, so they will have to eat it because they can't not order meat in a meat restaurant. He turned around and saw the face of the man who was preparing the meat for them. He realized that he was looking at them attentively. The young man was a little scared and had no choice but to not give himself away. So at that moment, he thought that he should eat at least one piece of this meat so as not to arouse suspicion. He slowly took this piece of meat with 2 chopsticks, opened his mouth, and put this meat in his mouth. The girl thought that in any case, she could eat just one piece. She decided that she could eat vegetables because she was a vegetarian and would stick to this concept. But she didn't succeed because the young man told her to eat meat immediately. Otherwise, she wouldn't be his partner. The girl raised her hand and asked to please bring her noodles with soy sauce without any additional ingredients. At that moment, a little boy entered the restaurant with tears in his eyes and he was crying loudly. It was clear from his expression that he was really upset and didn't know what to do. The young man and the girl turned and looked at this child. They did not understand how he could enter this restaurant. This boy approached the man who was frying meat, grabbed him by his work clothes, and said that his mother was hiding in this restaurant. He received a notification that his mother left her phone here. Although the police and his brother say that this can't happen, he knows that this restaurant smells like his mother. The man was very surprised and started saying that this was some kind of nonsense and that this child was making it up. This man said that this is a restaurant and if he, the kid, distracts him, then he will not be scolded. This child said that he will not leave until he finds his mother and called her. At that moment, the young man turned and looked at the girl sitting next to him. Because her face was already tense and her hair stopped with smoke, he had been warned before that she would react like that. He realized that she was reacting very strongly to blood and problems with her family. He told her to calm down, but it seemed that she did not hear him. The girl was furious and it seemed like the child who was crying was herself when her parents were killed. At one point, her hand was already on the knife that was cutting vegetables. The girl shouted to the workers of this restaurant to bring his mother. She no longer understood anything and did not give in to the miracle that was happening to her. She screamed to bring his mother immediately. She started insulting the employees of this restaurant and shouted that they were ordinary pieces of trash. The young man didn't know what to do. He was a little confused and sat silently, not reacting to everything that was happening. At some point, her mother was in front of her eyes. She was smiling, but her face was covered in blood. Her mother was saying that everything was fine and she should calm down. She remembered her mother saying that he was a bad person, so she knew that something like this would happen someday. And she reminded me of what state she was in at the moment when her parents died. But she also remembered who the man was, who pointed the gun and killed her mother. She was a child who hated herself for not being able to do anything, despite the fact that she couldn't cope with it. She grew up in a porous. So she stood there and screamed for the baby's mother to be brought in, and that everyone in that establishment was just pieces of trash. At that moment, before her eyes was the same man who photographed her parents after he was able to kill them. The young man thought that this was really the end and their complete failure. He sat and doused himself as if he didn't know what to do. One of the employees who was frying the meat tried to approach the girl and tried to calm her down. He said that he didn't know where she got the axe from, but asked her to put it away. At that moment, the axe flew right over his head with a whistle. The girl told this man not to move and not to say anything random. He has no right to do that. She shouted that it seemed she understood what was going on here and was ready to settle accounts with these guys. She told the restaurant worker standing in front of her, holding an axe to his throat, that if he did not comply with her demands, she would kill him. The first thing she demanded was that he go and bring the mother of this child. If he can't bring her, then he must find out her exact location. The second thing the girl demanded was that he call their boss into the restaurant hall. She ordered to do it as quickly as possible. Otherwise, she was ready to deal with all the guys who worked in this restaurant. Two of these workers did not understand what to do if their boss found out. He would most likely kill them all. One of the workers didn't understand where the manager had gone and how this crazy woman had found out about everything that was going on here. He had to go to the kitchen and report everything, otherwise the employee could have died. The girl screamed at them to move as fast as possible, or they would go deaf. She said that they could all die. One of the employees stood silently. He was afraid to turn around because a very sharp axe was right at his throat. At that moment, a man with long hair entered the restaurant hall. He asked his staff what the commotion was and what was going on. It was the manager of the meat restaurant, Rajogi Wang Chung-sik. The manager wanted an explanation from his employees. One of his assistants tried to tell him something. This assistant came as close as possible to the manager and very quietly told him in his ear everything that happened in this restaurant. The manager was shocked. His whole face became tense and he was very outraged by what happened. After which, he raised his hand up because he didn't understand what was happening to him. And then he said that he had headphones in his ears. He already thought that he was completely deaf and could not hear anything at all. He took out an earphone from his ear. The manager said that he was very scared because he thought that he was finished at his young age. His assistant just agreed with him. Then the manager said that he had to repeat everything he had told him before. The manager looked at the girl and said that first he would deal with her. She should know that the mess she had made here was a serious crime. To behave in such a way, preventing employees from serving customers, is an obstacle to doing business. This is already some kind of vandalism. Then he said that in addition to the fact that the girl also threatened and attempted on the life of another person. The manager asked her if she really thought she was in Christ's bosom if she did such things in broad daylight. He asked if she really had problems with her head. At that moment, the young man thought that no God would help her anymore. The manager looked at the girl and asked her if she really just took my child's word for it that his mother had left him and caused all this chaos. The manager told the girl that they should have a frank talk. A restaurant that sells human meat in the 21st century is just crazy. He told her that she was completely out of her mind if she was talking about this topic. It was just nonsense. Even an elementary school student wouldn't believe it. The manager put his hand on the axe and tried to remove the axe from his assistant's neck. Then the manager said if they pay compensation, apologize and leave peacefully, he won't call the police. He added that he was afraid that if the police came, they would scare away all their clients. So he suggested that they just disperse. At that moment, the young man analyzed everything he said and asked the manager what the manager said about human flesh, but they didn't say anything about it. This question stumped the manager of this restaurant, so he gave himself away in what he does. He tried to feed what he had said as best he could, but he was very bad at it. He raised his hand pretending to fix his hair, and at that time he took out his knife. The very next second, he was standing in a fighting stance ready to attack the girl. The owner of this restaurant shouted that in that case they should just die right here and now. After which he swung and tried to attack the girl. His blow was above her head. She managed to dodge this blow. Immediately after this attack, the girl pushed off to jump as high as possible. She wanted to strike from above with her axe right on the head of the manager who was standing in front of her. The blow almost reached its target, but this manager managed to block and parry the blow of the axe. The manager held the girl's axe with the knife he had in his hand. She couldn't resist and asked the manager of this restaurant if he was a killer because he had good training. The restaurant manager told her no, he tried to hit her in self-defense. The manager told the girl that he was from an alley in the Yanbian district, which is why he was in good physical condition. The girl swung with all her might and tried to strike. At that moment, the manager jumped up to avoid the blow. The manager continued to talk to her and tell her that he had heard that you can earn good money in Korea, but he felt that working here as a manager was not his path. Then he turned his head and shouted to his workers that they were not standing like statues. He told them if the restaurant goes bankrupt, he doesn't understand who will forget about them illegals. He told them that no one would give them money so that they could return to their homeland without empty pockets. He shouted to all his assistants to start with this crazy girl who was holding an axe, and ending with this trembling child who had never seen anything like this in his life. He ordered his subordinates to kill them all without exception. He believed that this was the only way to prevent the restaurant from going bankrupt in this country, where they are treated like dogs. The most important thing was that this was their only way to survive in this country, so they should not stand still. All the assistants grabbed their knives. A young man was standing near a table. A girl with an axe was standing next to him, and a little boy was hiding behind him. They were surrounded on all sides by the restaurant workers who were armed with knives. The young man asked the girl if he hoped she had a plan. She answered, of course she did. She was ready to settle everything here and end it there. The young man replied that she had not told him about such a plan. She was just a killer, a person who was ready to kill here and now. He understood that he was not a martial arts champion at all. And if you start fighting with so many people now, even a hand-to-hand combat champion will have a hard time and he might die. But if suddenly a miracle happens and he still wins, a bloodbath clearly contradicts the rules of a killer. And specifically, his first rule is no unnecessary killings. Because the iron rule of the killer was that killers do not kill anyone except the targets he was asked to kill. Even if those people are villains, they are not the target. You cannot kill them. At that moment, the young man closed his eyes and thought that he just wanted to conduct an investigation and nothing more. And he had a partner who didn't follow any rules at all. The young man decided that it was better for him to just leave. Because when this girl gets angry, the only way out that everyone around her has is to just run away. The young man understood that despite the fact that it was his grandmother's request, no matter what kind of partner there is, everything has its limits, and he saw no point in risking his life by breaking the killer's iron rules. At that moment, he remembered this old woman who said if the moment comes when he needs the help of an elder, then he should come to her and take care of her. The young man took a few steps to the side to distract attention. He told his partner that he had figured out how not to disappoint his colleague and not to betray his principles. The girl did not hear anyone at all. She saw only the enemy in front of her and was ready to destroy him. The young man approached the child and asked if he had any coins. A plan came into his head. The kid, without thinking twice, reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins. He held them out, holding them in his hands. The young man told the boy that he would get rid of all the people who were preventing him from finding his mother, and he said that they would consider that this was his payment for the service. At that moment, the girl kicked one of the guys in the stomach with all her might. One of the workers tried to stop her. He wanted to grab her by the shoulder from behind. The kid told the young man that he agreed and was ready to give these coins for the work that he would now do. The guy, when he entered the hall with these coins in his hand, he swung one of these coins and threw it with all his might towards the employee who was behind the girl and who was ready to hit her. This coin flew straight at this worker. He didn't even have time to return from it. Unexpectedly for everyone, the guy who was hit by the coin fell to the floor and everyone turned to look at him. The managers of this restaurant, when they saw this, thought what this idiot was doing and where he even came from. The young man couldn't stand it and told the manager that he was an ordinary killer and not some kind of idiot. And most importantly, he just received orders from the customer and he is ready to kill everyone who prevents his customer from finding his mother. When the restaurant manager heard what he was saying, she asked again what kind of killer was there, because he didn't even have a weapon. Did he really think that he would throw coins and kill everyone? The young man at that moment did not say anything in response. He simply assessed the situation. He remembered the words of his mentor about the lack of weapons. He then told them that they were talking nonsense, and in that case they were just garbage idiots if they didn't understand what they were saying. The young man remembered every word he said and what he taught him in class. His teacher said that at any time and in any place they had to seize the opportunity to kill the victim. This is the goal of a real killer. He then asked them if they would really leave the target alive simply because they didn't have a weapon with them. As an experiment, he asked them to focus their attention on these two objects that lay in front of them. The first object was a pen. It was a common item that is found in any office and would not arouse suspicion wherever they carried it. Then his teacher said that the pen should be held like this and showed how to do it. He explained that they needed to concentrate on the top of the solar plexus, and then they should kill and not fuss. You need to hit the heart and lungs. The target will eventually die due to excessive bleeding or organ damage. Then all the students who were trying to get this license shouted to the teacher that they believed him that it could be done. The second method that their teacher suggested was using ordinary chopsticks. He said that these sticks can be found in any home or restaurant. Now we need to figure out how to use them. It was then that he said that whoever guessed it would be given the talent of a killer that could be used in practice. One of the students raised his hand. He said a very simple truth, that these sticks need to be pierced. He said that they can be used to pierce just like a pen, and that it can be the same murder weapon. The teacher couldn't hold back and threw the sticks he had in his hands at the guy to see if he could pierce them or not. All the other students turned around in fear and looked to see what had happened to this guy. Then the teacher said that he was an idiot. In fact, these sticks were metal. Therefore, these sticks cannot be used as a knife or any other object. They cannot be used as awls because they are very slippery and impossible to pierce with them. However, they are light and strong, small and well-balanced. These sticks are the best metal medium-range killing weapon that the young man remembered. He was already holding one of these sticks in his hands. A worker at this restaurant was unable to jump back because one of his legs was pinned to the floor with a metal rod. He wasn't so threatening anymore. He was screaming in pain and didn't know what to do. The manager of this restaurant turned to look at his employee. He wanted to understand what was going on there. He couldn't even imagine it. But the young man did not stop. He released from his hand in an instant several more of these metal sticks at his opponents. And another thug worker was already chained to the wall with 2 metal rods. Then another one gave in because his body was pierced by 2 more metal sticks that hit his side and leg. The manager stood silently. He couldn't do anything. He was waiting to see what would happen next. In that case, the manager thought that he should be careful not only with the axe and with this crazy girl who could attack him. And someone's punch was almost next to his neck. He was able to avoid this blow at the last moment. The girl was determined. After one blow, she immediately tried to strike, but the manager tripped her. She shouted at him. Was he just slacking off and losing the will to fight? The manager told her not to be rude to him. He could kill her alone very easily. At that moment, the girl said that that is why she is not alone, and pointed with her thumb to the real young man from behind. She thought that, to be honest, she was also surprised that the partners with whom she had to work were only busy running away when they had problems. Well, the feeling she had now was that for the first time she had that very partner whom she could trust. She has found a partner who can accept her as she is and will not discuss her. She told the manager that she had a partner, and he wasn't that bad at the moment when she swung her axe over his head. The manager of this restaurant didn't know what to do next, so he put up a block so she couldn't hit him. Her partner stood behind and watched all the other employees of this restaurant. And the man told the girl that he figured it out. He asked her how she was doing. In fact, it is not 1 + 1 = 2, but 1 + 1 = 3, and perhaps even more. The girl looked at him and said that she too, the manager of this restaurant, was lying on the floor and her axe was near his neck. At that moment, we asked the manager if he was going to bring this boy's mother before she rips his head off. The manager started talking about how they were idiotic bastards and started calling his brother. He said if his brother was here, nothing would have worked out for them. This manager also had a good partner, and this partner was only for him. At that moment, everyone heard heavy steps. Another young man entered the restaurant hall holding an axe and a knife. This guy said that he is here and he is the best duo of Yanbian, and he is one of Wang Chongbei's brothers. The young man realized that they had not quite correctly defined their goal, and their goal had just appeared in front of them. The girl looked at this guy and realized that this was their target, Wang Chongbei, and he was now standing in front of them. The manager, lying on the floor, began shouting at his brother to free him as quickly as possible. The girl thought that this was very good. They would now kill these crazy people here and end all this in one day. At that moment, one of the knives that was in the hands of Wang Chongbei's brother flew towards her, and at the last moment she managed to block the knife with her axe. When Wang Chungbei saw the girl fight back, he told her that she was fighting hard. He looked at her and said that she had nothing to do. She was still a loser. In fact, it wasn't a hit at all. It was just a pass to his brother. She turned her head and saw that the manager who had just been lying on her leash had actually grabbed that hatchet. The girl didn't understand what kind of nonsense this was, and what kind of synchronized duet this was that had just formed before her eyes. Now it was clear that this manager had originally planned to snatch this hatchet. The manager tried to swing at the girl, and at that moment he got hit in the hand and dropped the hatchet. The young man told the girl to open her review because he wasn't sure he could do it right twice. In the restaurant now stood on one side a girl and a young man. They were partners, and on the other side 2 brothers who were also partners. Manager, ask your brother why he came so late because he actually almost died. He was almost killed. His brother replied that he was watching through the CCTV system in the meat warehouse, and he wanted to do it only so that he would feel the value of his brother. The manager looked at his brother and said, not to do that here again. He is not interested at all because he could lose his life. He then added that when they are together, they become invincible. His brother held a huge knife in his hand, and he said that he understood everything and that his younger brother would not be angry. Then he said that he would make broth from these 2 young people and then take care of his brother. The manager told his brother to buy him some alcohol or something tasty. He gives human meat to fish. He didn't like that. The young man thought that somehow the painting had become a composition of the duet of these brothers, and the problem was that their result would be better than his and his partners who had not even worked together for a day. Moreover, he understood that all this could end at any moment because the forces were clearly not equal. He thought that it might be because he was throwing the sticks too often. It hurt him as if all the muscles in his fingers were torn. At that moment, he felt a miracle hand that took his hand and squeezed it very tightly. There was a sort of blur before his eyes, and he no longer understood what was happening and what would happen next. At that moment, the girl said that they could do it and put his hand on her chest. She said that they would do it because she trusted him. He thought that when they say something like that, you can't despair or let this person down. Very sharp scissors appeared in his hands that could replace any knife for him. The young man thought that he couldn't screw up at all because she was counting on him. Their opponents asked if they were ready to fight and if they were ready to die. The girl immediately answered them that they were ready, and they were really ready to kill them. Among all the rumors, there is one rumor in Jinshin that there are 2 people living in the slums near Yanbian, and these 2 living there are 2 wolves in human clothing. If these 2 wolves in human clothing are watching any person, then they are doing it for no reason. One day, a photograph of a man who needed to be destroyed fell into their hands, but they didn't track him down and follow him around, waiting for him to be in a completely inappropriate place. When these 2 were convinced that this was the same person in the photograph, then at that very moment, this person became their victim. The older brother had to make a decision and tell his younger brother how they would proceed. At that moment, these 2 showed a wolf instinct and no longer resembled ordinary people. It seemed that they were following the scent of their victim, ready to attack him at any moment. There were rumors that if you ask the wolves to kill a person, they will not only kill him in an instant, but when the police arrive, they won't be able to find anything that will prove that this person was killed. Namely, the police never found dead bodies of people because there were none. These 2 wolves had a truly wolfish character. They were ready to devour everything that came their way, and they ate their victims. They ate flesh and bones, destroying all evidence of their crime. It seemed they liked it even more than killing and eating human flesh. It was part of the ritual, that's why they were called wolves. But then these wolves were caught by the police and transported abroad. During this operation, 162 people went missing. At that moment, the older brother of these 2 wolves licked his finger, which was covered in blood, showing how bloodthirsty he was. The younger one said that now they should understand what kind of a mess they made in the restaurant. At that moment, the young man only thought that 162 people were missing, so the girl said that they were imprisoning 162 people. The girl couldn't hold back and started laughing loudly. She said to look at them as they lie. The young man looked at his partner with an ambiguous expression. The manager also looked at her. I don't understand what was funny about what he said. The girl said that she had never heard such a funny story about some nonsense about wolves in human clothes. Aren't they just rabid dogs that can't figure out what they eat? Then the girl added, although even wild dogs are scary, and it is better to call them just kidding ours, the younger brother of the restaurant owner got very angry from these words. The elder told him to calm down because this is just his psychological attack, and he is just being provoked, he said, calming his brother so that he would just watch and learn. The older brother looked at the girl and agreed with her, and said that let's say they are 2 wild dogs, but the young people have team names or they are just like that. He thought that if he said this, he was ready to just laugh and break their spirit. The girl unexpectedly, even for herself, said that she had already told them what their team was called. The younger brother tried to remember, but he heard nothing and she didn't say any name. The girl told them that their team is called Your Mom. Their team is called Your Mom. At that moment, the young man got very angry. He looked at his partner and said, "What is she saying? He doesn't want that name." The girl said it was too late. The younger brother looked at her and asked what kind of name it was. He was also a little shocked. And the older brother told the girl that she was most likely homeschooled and did not understand what she was talking about. He told his younger brother not to kill her here. They would eat her alive. To which his younger brother thought that if she resisted, but despite this, he told his older brother that he understood everything and he would deal with her as quickly as possible. Two brothers who called themselves wolves moved from their place and ran towards the young people to attack them. The girl at that moment was absolutely calm and raised her axe and told her partner that he should be ready to resist. At that moment, the two of them, the girl and the young man, got up and moved towards their opponent. She had a huge axe, and the young man had a knife and very sharp scissors. After just a few seconds, they tried to strike, but both the girl's strike and the young man's strike met with resistance. The girl did not despair. She turned around, swung, and decided to strike her opponent again. Her opponent was the younger brother from the Wolves team, and the manager of this restaurant who had already lost a fight to her once. At the very beginning of the battle, the skills of both teams seemed worse, and despite the fact that the forces were different, they acted according to almost the same attacking scheme. However, at some point, everything started to go in a completely different direction, and it was no longer clear which side was stronger. The young man was injured and had to retreat. The girl also couldn't resist and was also injured. She also took a few steps back. Gradually, the balance began to collapse. In some sense, this was a natural result. It was a two-on-two team match, not an individual competition where the abilities of two people are compared. On the one hand, the team that has been working together for more than 10 years is the Volkov team, and besides, they were brothers. On the other hand, it was a duet created overnight, and up until that moment, they had not found a common language at all. Of course, that side was getting the advantage, so the younger brother commanded Volkov and asked the young people if they had really run out of strength and were actually losing. The older brother said that at the very beginning he said that in their duet 1 + 1 = 3. The girl was a little upset. The young man looked at his hand. Of course he thought that this was possible, but he still didn't know that it would grow so early right before his eyes. The girl was very upset because she should have torn the head off this manager earlier young man, think that by moving without a pre-planned route, he and his partner constantly interfere with each other. And if there is a duet on the other side where 1 + 1 = 3, then they are a duet in which 1½ is obtained instead of 2. He thought about what to do. He needed more time to think about everything and remember everything his teacher told him. He looked at his target and thought what to do. Before that, his older brother Volkov asked him what he was looking at. Of course, he was sure that she would refuse now. He personally can't change his specialty, but the word personally looked like his next idea. So he asked his partner if she was sure she could win this fight if she fought the manager again. The girl answered him that she was not a weakling. Of course she could. The young man told her that then she should deal with this guy and he would prepare a place for her. The girl didn't understand what the problem was and what he was planning, but she was ready to agree with it. On the other hand, she had no choice but to accept what her partner said, so she agreed. The older brother of their opponent and their main target thought that the more time passes, the more disadvantageous their position becomes. Due to bleeding and injuries, he thought that they would probably try to get one last chance to attack. The elder brother told his younger brother that their opponents decided to risk their lives to attack them. This time they need to let things slide, and if he lets go, he can win. The younger brother did not understand what it meant to let go, because they could kill him at any opportunity. At that moment, the young man and his partner moved towards their opponents and decided to attack again. But this time they decided to act according to a plan that was not as simple as it had been before. Their two opponents stood waiting to see what would happen next. They did not understand what the young people were planning. On one hand, the young man threw a knife at his opponent, trying to distract him in this way. The older brother and the young man's main opponent blocked the knife by raising his hands up. When he had his body completely exposed, at that moment the young man pounced on him because in his other hand he had sharpened scissors. Of course his opponents were much stronger, and he immediately lowered his hand with his weapon trying to hit or hurt the young man again. But the young man quickly repelled his attack and held a pair of sharply sharpened scissors in front of him. His opponent grabbed the young man's hand. It was the same hand that was wounded, and he told the young man that before rushing at another person he should think carefully, to which the guy replied that he was smarter than a wild dog. Then he immediately added that he doubted it, and that he was no smarter than an ordinary wild dog. The manager was standing in another part, and he was not at all involved in the fight that was happening between his older brother and the young man. He was very scared and called his older brother. I don't understand what to do, because he understood that he couldn't cope on his own. The very next moment, the girl knocked the weapon out of the manager's hands with her axe, and he was disarmed. The girl thought that these two, who seemed so huge and invincible, were finally separated, and now she offered the manager to go on a date with death. The young man at that moment thought that he was of course weaker than Wang Chengbi when it came to strength, but at that moment he didn't care, because he noticed that his opponent had rather slippery slippers, and this could decide at least one event. The elder brother of the Volkov team thought what a bastard he got, and did not understand what kind of trick he came up with. At that moment he felt a very strong blow. It seemed that even he lost his balance, and that he was about to fall. But the elder brother commanded Volkov was able to gather his strength and grab the young man by the hand so that he could not strike him. His legs were tense. He was holding his body back with all his might. The only thing he came up with was to hit the young man in the stomach with his knee while holding him down. This thug thought that maybe the son of a bitch Navid had hit him too. He seemed so weak. He snatched the scissors from him and threw them back. He had the feeling that he had spent all his strength on some nonsense. The young man understood that everything was going according to plan, and his plan was not as bad as they thought. This thug was now sure that he would definitely kill him now, holding the young man by the hair. When he raised his head, he saw that the young man was laughing right in his face. He asked why he was laughing. Had he really lost his mind? The guy answered him that it was not at all because he was laughing. It was just that he was looking in the other direction and saw this spectacle. The thug standing in front of him didn't understand what kind of sight this was, and decided to turn his head in that direction too. He asked what kind of spectacle was going on there, at which point the girl threw an axe in his direction. He didn't even have time to finish a single word as the axe was already in his head. The task was completed. The thug held the guy by the hair for some time, but after a few seconds he fell to the floor with an axe right in the middle of his head. On one side of the floor lay the older brother of this wolf duo with an axe in his head, and on the other hand, his younger brother, whom she was able to kill first, was lying all over the blood. At that moment, the young man realized that they had accomplished their task, and they were able to destroy the target that was in their assignment. The girl was also happy that everything worked out for them this time, because before that she had never had such a reliable partner as in this fight. The young man tried to get up despite the fact that his hands were covered in blood. He stood up and headed towards his partner. In this situation, she was the only one he could rely on. She also stood silently, and understood that he was the first who did not run away after arriving at the state she might be in. They came up to each other and stood and looked into each other's eyes. They were happy with what had happened. The young man exhaled a little, realizing that he was able to complete this task only because he had her as his partner. They were ready to hug each other despite the fact that this was their first assignment, and before that they had a complete misunderstanding. He shouted loudly that the first mission of the team, Your Mom, was completed successfully, but despite this, he said that he did not like this name. The young man and the girl decided to open the refrigerator where the meat was stored, and the cold blew on them. Inside this refrigerator, along with the carcasses that were hanging, sat 3 people. They were scared. When the door to this refrigerator opened, they looked and saw that there were completely different people standing there, and there was a small child with them. The young man held the boy's hand, and he had to complete the task as he had promised him until the end. Among the 3 who were sitting in that refrigerator was his mother. She couldn't imagine that she would be able to see her child again. When the boy saw his mother, he screamed loudly, and tears of joy flowed from his eyes. Then he ran up to her and hugged her tightly. It was the most beautiful scene they had seen in a long time. The young man and the girl looked and thought that what they did was right. Thus, they justified their actions. After some time, the police arrived at this restaurant, and they took away all the arrested employees of this restaurant. And also a company arrived that took away the bodies of 2 brothers from the Wolves team. The girl and the young man took everyone who was injured out of the refrigerator. Some of them couldn't walk. In front of them stood the chief police officer. He was one of the customers of the murder of this Volkov before. The police shook the young man's hand and thanked him for a job well done. When the police started to take everyone out of this restaurant, some because they were detained from others because they were victims, the young man and the girl stood and watched everything that was happening. Then the boss came up to the young man and pointed to the exit. He said that they should do it as quickly as possible. One of the police officers wanted to stop the girl, but no one let him do it. The boss stopped him. The girl and the young man used the emergency exit and went outside. When they left, they didn't talk to each other. They felt like they needed to get home as quickly as possible. The young man looked away as he passed a nearby alley. There he saw the chief of police and also the same boy with his mother who thanked him and waved to him. In just a few minutes, they were at their market where they worked near the girl's grandmother's restaurant. The clock was already 10:10. It was quite late, and the old woman was worried about her granddaughter. She stood in the middle of her restaurant looking at her watch, not understanding why it took so long. The very next moment, the door creaked. This creaking was heard only because there was absolute silence around. The old lady turned her head to see who had come into her restaurant at such an hour. In front of her stood these two young men and her granddaughter, who was showing the victory sign with 2 fingers. After she treated all her wounds, she went to her room to think about what had happened that day. The customer who hired the killer to kill the brothers from the Volkov duo received a check he must pay 10 times more than he thought. The young man was very indignant when he found out about this. He told his partner that if she cheats, they will be excluded from the dealer association. After completing the mission, they became successful despite the fact that it billed them 10 times more. A few days later, the old man came up and said that there were new orders and called them assholes. They successfully completed several tasks one after another. The amounts became larger and larger, so the crisis was left behind. First, they had to take out one blonde guy. They did it very quickly. Next was a soldier who waved his weapon incessantly and thus frightened people. Next, there was an old lady swindler who was ready to profit from anyone, despite the fact that she was so old. And there was also one from the government. They shot him right in the forehead so that he didn't even have time to understand what happened to him. They stood after their next task and understood that they had completed it. As a result, they hit each other with their fists. The girl wiped the blood from her shoulder and said that this was the 8th request for them to kill. The young man corrected him. He said that this is the 9th for the sake of the dead. It is worth remembering such important moments. Vipata, his partner, noted that they already have quite a lot on their account. She said if she completed a few more of these orders, her rating would increase to B. The young man didn't understand and asked again what that meant. The girl smiled and said that if this happens, they will break up. That's what it means. Then she said that if it was possible, if he asked her very much, then she would be able to help a young man like him. The young man looked at her and said, "This is great news. It means he will no longer be in debt to her grandmother." Then he added, now he can calmly do everything himself. The girl's face was not as shining as a few seconds ago. At that moment, she wanted to hit him, but he simply said that he was ready to congratulate her. She got angry and told him that she didn't understand why he was like that, and he didn't understand at all what she meant. The young man fell to the ground from her blow. He said that he thought she was bragging, so he decided to congratulate her. The girl turned around and left. She said if that's the case, then let him figure it out himself. He said that he no longer knows what she had imagined again. At that moment, she thought that she still wanted to work with him because she had never had such a partner in her entire life. He sat on the chair and felt very uncomfortable because it was the first time he received so much attention. The girl who was sitting right in front of him said that she thanked him for the interview. She was happy with everything. She added that this interview would be published on the 15th of next month, and they would send him a copy. This interview was supposed to be published in a magazine that specialized in killers and was called Killer Korea. He was interviewed by a reporter and a top-class killer. Her code name is Killaji. The girl said that the issue turned out great. One could even say that in her opinion it was unusual. The young man was very shy. He said that he was probably not suitable for this interview. He only had a C grade. He thought that it might seem arrogant. The reporter said that firstly, they specialize in hot new products, so everything is fine with that. She also said that it seems that no one has ever managed to complete a task in the rookie's wheel in which a Class A bodyguard participated. She believed that they also carried out subsequent tasks very carefully. In her opinion, this interview is worthy of publication in a magazine. She thanked the young man again for agreeing to talk to her and giving her an interview. He was very shy. The reporter said when he gets a B or A grade, he should give interviews more often. The young man was on the cover of the magazine Killer Korea. It said that he was a newbie and on his first mission, and also about his strict teacher. When he looked at himself in this magazine, he even found it funny. It seemed to him that this was not happening to him. The old man and his assistant did not understand what was happening to the young man and why he was laughing so loudly while looking at the magazine. The old man asked his assistant what happened and why this guy was rolling on the floor. Kim Kun answered the old man that the interview he mentioned was published in the magazine. Kim Kun believed that the young man was completely crazy and was behaving inappropriately for his profession. The old man took the broom in his hands and told the young man to pull himself together before he cuts out his tongue. They don't worship ancestors here. The young man looked at this magazine, and until he read it, he didn't even know what this interview would be like and what could come out of it. Almost all killers had a magazine with photos of the young man, and you could see him on the cover. It was a fairly popular publication, so among all the killers, almost everyone bought this magazine. And also this magazine fell into the hands of a security guard who worked together with a bodyguard called a clairvoyant. The guard turned to the gentleman, clearly the street. He showed him the magazine and told him to look. The guard said that one of the killers lost this magazine, but in this magazine it was written about a bodyguard, a clairvoyant. He glanced at it. It said about an order with a Class A bodyguard and a sect leader. The clairvoyant bodyguard picked up this magazine and started reading everything that was written there. The guard said that the guy that was mentioned in this magazine was a Class C. The clairvoyant bodyguard got so angry that he started shouting that this guy was an ordinary son of a dog and was ready to tear up this magazine. At the same time, in another part of the city, near a huge building where there were almost never any people. This was the headquarters of the Korean Bodyguard Association. In front of this building, there was a monument near which there were several children accompanied. The children asked their teacher who this uncle standing on the pedestal was. She replied that it was a man named Wang Kano, a first-generation Korean bodyguard. Since there were very few people, the loud sound of heels clicking could be heard when they took the next step. This girl who was in a hurry, she looked very neat and was in a special uniform. She was the manager of the Korean Association of Bodyguards. Her code name was Editor. When the girl approached, she said hi to everyone. The guys turned their heads and looked at her. The girl said that she would give them a tour today. She asked to be called simply Editor Nuna. She raised her hand and asked the children if they knew where they were. The children unanimously said that this is the headquarters of the Korean Association of Bodyguards. The girl was very surprised. She asked the guys if they were really preparing to meet her. Then she wanted to ask another question. What do bodyguards do? The children answered in unison that they were protecting people and that they had really prepared to come on this excursion. The editor said that they understood everything correctly. She then asked the children, what about the fact that no one will protect them? She tried to explain that a bodyguard only protects 1% of clients with high social status who can pay enough for security services. That's just how the world works. One of the boys asked the editor, so they won't help him if he doesn't have money. The girl asked her what will happen if her mom and dad are in danger. The teacher didn't want the children to hear the answer, so she covered her ears. The editor told them that no, she wouldn't help them because they wouldn't have money. And then she added that in this world there is nothing free, regardless of whether their life is on the line or not, and their parents are no exception. She said if their parents are Korean aristocrats or public figures, then please, they should give them contacts and information. In this case, they are ready to protect them. When she spoke about this, someone hit her so that she flew to the side. And a second later, it was already visible how the editor fell face down on the ground and another girl in glasses stood behind her. The editor lay on the ground for a few more minutes, and the second girl said that she was an ordinary scoundrel who was extorting money again. This second one was the youngest bodyguard of Class B. Her name was Chang Suho. Her code name was Little Mountain. The girl looked around and told the visitors that everything was fine now, and they could now go to the Secret Service History Exhibition Hall on the second floor. Their new tour guide told them to forget everything the previous bodyguard had said and to hurry after him, because after the tour they would be able to try out the new submachine gun. She walked them to the elevator, sat them down, and sent them to the second floor. When they left, this girl came up and asked where the clairvoyant went and why she was responsible for this excursion. She screamed so loudly that she could be heard all around. She said, even if I'm not a clairvoyant here, then who allowed her to take the place of a clairvoyant? This girl sitting on the ground started making excuses and saying, didn't she hear that recently the clairvoyant turned into a complete wreck? He probably had a nervous breakdown after a new killer appeared or something like that. And if she is so worried that he is not the one conducting the tour, then let her find out from her colleagues about his condition because she is already tired of conducting these tours. The bodyguard named Little Mountain looked at his colleague, turned around and left. The weather was great that day, so the colleagues got together and decided to see what condition the clairvoyant bodyguard was really in. They arrived at his house. First, they just rang the bell, but no one opened the door for them. Then they started knocking, but the door didn't open either. They knew he was there. One of the bodyguards asked if she was sure that he was at home, it seemed to him, but he had already called 10 times. It was a bodyguard of Class C. His name was Kudo, safety first. Another of their partners said that she really wants to sleep. She has a night shift again today. It was like a bodyguard of level C. Her code name is Night Shift. Suho turned around, looked at the two of them, and shouted loudly at them so that they couldn't even object to her. She told them who took care of them when they were hungry, and the interns who bought them everything in the store and brought it to them so that they could eat well. And also during a joint mission when a conflict arose with a client who resolved it peacefully. She reminded her colleagues that this person was none other than Sunbae himself, specifically the bodyguard, the clairvoyant. She said in that case they should not help him when he is in trouble. The two replied to her that at that time they could not eat a single piece because it was against the rules, and what he brought was not all had to be thrown away. All food prohibited for import would be thrown away. It was the rule. And the most important thing is that she couldn't stand it and slap the client, so they are not obligated to this person at all. The girl stood looking at her colleagues and said that no one would return home at least until they found out whether the clairvoyant bodyguard was alive or not. When she was talking about this, she heard a creak behind her. The front door opened slightly and it was possible to go inside. After the door opened, the bodyguard clairvoyant himself came out and said that he was alive, and they were convinced of this, after which they could go home. All three were shocked because they smelled alcohol, which was not acceptable for bodyguards. The clairvoyant told them to leave because he really wanted to sleep and he wanted to close his door. The girl told him to stop and tried to go inside. She couldn't just leave it like that. When she looked into the room, she saw a pile of garbage lying on the floor and which emitted a terrible smell. There was also a pile of garbage on the kitchen table and a lot of food that needed to be thrown out. The three colleagues couldn't leave it like that, so they went inside the room and sat down. They were just in shock. So they asked the clairvoyant's bodyguard that he seemed very sad because he was drinking like he usually does. There was music playing in his room and Tenar was singing with a very sad voice. The girl asked her partner if he was sad about the mission that failed, and that was why he was in such a state. The young man who came with her said that sometimes this happens, it's not like that, and he himself said that being a real professional requires hard work and sincerity. The clairvoyant said that, well, the bodyguard failed his mission. Yes, sometimes it happens, and they may think that it is not so important. The goal of the professional is to get rid of the experience of failure and work hard again. But what if the person who killed his client was a C-level killer and he was a rookie? And the worst thing is that he had never officially committed his murders before. His colleagues who came to him were shocked by what they heard. The clairvoyant says that the most terrible thing is that all this was shoved into a magazine, that the murderers read and showed them this magazine. Since the release of such a human-free magazine, everything has gone wrong. They said that he was a bodyguard. I clearly have the street end. A-level bodyguard criticized him for downgrading the security industry. B-level killers will say A-level isn't so reliable. And the worst thing that happened is that classmates no longer like his posts. The rumor of his failures has already spread. One of the girls clearly told Nice that at least they don't think so, and he shouldn't be sad. The guy who came to him confirmed her words and told him not to worry. He was sure that with the next task things would go much better. All their consolations were useless. He was still in a state where he couldn't just get out. The clairvoyant bodyguard said he doesn't think he'll ever be able to work as a bodyguard again. His skill's not sure he has talent. He also said that he doesn't think they will change their minds, so they should just leave. If they want to help, they can just take the trash and throw it away. When they came out into the street, the three bodyguards were unable to speak for some time. One of them, a girl, said that she doesn't think her heart will be broken like that. She thinks that it won't work at all. The young man thought that it would be better if he rested a little. Although if he drank as much as he drank now, then rest was not rest at all. The girl interrupted him and said that the C-level killer was a scary guy. He not only killed his client, but he also killed the bodyguard's heart. The guy noticed that this was all wrong. The interview for the magazine was just some kind of horror. Because of him, his whole career was ruined. At that moment, their colleague was just walking silently. She took one step after another without saying anything. Apparently, the cutting stopped and said that yes, this is all wrong, and that regarding the C-class killer, her colleagues looked at her. Then she said, in order to set an example for those who violate business ethics and to save the soul of the poor clairvoyant, she decided that she needed to look at that guy. Her colleagues listened to her carefully until the end. She thought that it was necessary to make it so that this killer guy could no longer kill. This would be the way out of this situation. At this time, in another part of the same market where the old man's shop was, a young man was bringing in boxes of vegetables and fruits. He stopped, looked at the girl who brought another batch of fruit, and asked her if she called him. The girl answered him no. He had the feeling that someone was calling him. At the same time, the conversation between the bodyguards continued. The guy told Jang Suho to wait, and she didn't get excited at all. He tried to remind her, because she probably completely forgot the oath of a bodyguard, He told her that as a bodyguard, he would never use force because of personal emotions. The girl answered him that she would use this power only to protect herself and her clients. She knew all this very well because she was the head. Then it was unclear how she could easily persuade someone to take care of her if she knew him so well. It was unclear if she was caught and her license was taken away. Then it was clear she would have liked it. The girl said that she will use this power only to protect herself and her clients. This oath speaks of protection, but it does not say how to punish. At that moment, her colleague was very indignant because she believed that this should not be done for anything in the world. Suko answered them that a plan had come into her head, and it did not contradict their oath at all. She wanted to say how they could deal with this killer guy who was able to deal with the clairvoyant bodyguard in this way. She said when this sea-level guy has his next target and is ready to do his job, she will take action and alert his target that an order has been received for him, and she will make a contract to be responsible for his protection. They will be on the other side from this guy. And most importantly, when this killer tries to kill their client, they will be on guard. They will be able to protect their client and stop this guy from killing him. She came up with this whole plan just to thwart this killer's plans. She was ready to track him. After which he will definitely get caught and he will have nowhere to run. They will be able to catch him. He will then be very scared. He will have nothing to do and he will have to stay. And they're such cool bodyguards who have completed their task and will further increase their level. After they beat him up, they will immediately hand him over to the police, thus humiliating him and hang a sign around his neck saying attempted murder. The young man said that if they did all this, they would face disciplinary action, but he did not understand whether it was worth going that far. The girl answered him that this is the killer who would print on the cover of the magazine. That's exactly him who went too far. No matter how competitive the industry may be, this is already too much. She added that she wants to pay him back, even in this way, for what he did, and she wants to see the clairvoyant smile again. Her colleagues agreed with every word she said, so they nodded silently. The presenter, what they needed to do was find the same mentor or leader as the one who was killed by the rookie killer. At this time, the young man was doing something completely different. He was unloading the car. This time, he tried to do it without mistakes. Despite the fact that the boxes were quite heavy this time, he made sure that none of these boxes would fall. He understood what could happen. The supplier girl said that he was doing well, and she even got interested in watching him work. The young man turned around, looked at her, and said that he was trying very hard, and he was not going to make those mistakes. The old man told him to put the box down. He's just an ordinary tale. Does he still remember about shooting at the police, and if he screws up again, he'll declare war on him? The old man told the girl not to praise him because of ordinary things. This boy is developing a bad habit. The girl said that everything is fine now and he helps in the store, so there is no need to scold him for no reason. The girl said that the current generation works harder if they are praised and recognized more often. The old man got very angry and said that there was no point in poking his face into the poop. He already knew everything perfectly well. And then he said about the poop, he remembered that he had received an order, which he thought Chong Pothun could fulfill. The young man asked him again what the order was. Tarika explained that after So Moonsik, the leader of the Happy Happy cult, was killed, the Happy Happy sect collapsed, and none of the successors became the leaders of this sect. Customers who entrusted their requests to Poknam's shop were waiting for their families to return. Many who were in this sect returned their families and continued to live normal lives. But some believers never returned home and their relatives continued to search for them. There was one reason for all this. Seo Yunsik, the younger brother and deputy leader of the cult Seo Moonsik, he began the reconstruction of the Happy Happy cult. These two brothers were almost genetically identical. He was absolutely similar to his brother. In other words, one could say he was almost a sect leader. The old man said that they received a task, and it was to kill this guy, the leader of what they called this sect Happy Happy or Happy Happy. It was necessary to completely kill this cult from Kari. The old man said when he received this task, he initially thought to assign it to Kim Kun. But the client asked the man who killed the previous cult leader to take on the job. The old man said he didn't know who the customer was, but he agreed with him. The old man asked the guy if he could do it, or if he should entrust it to Kim Kun, and the man replied that he had to do it. The old man told him that he should not disappoint the client, who returned again with a request. The guy turned around and went to change his clothes. And the old man also added that he should not disappoint, and his young man showed that everything will be fine. The young man does not change clothes. He went to prepare to complete the next task. There was a guy with a listening device sitting on the roof near this market. It was one of the bodyguards who realized that the next target would be So Yunsik, and that he was the new leader of the Happy Happy sect. The bodyguard thought that hiding the listening devices on the cat was a good idea, so he hid it right on the cat's neck. After which the bodyguard took out his phone, and now he needed to tell his colleagues what the newbie killer's next target would be. He went into a group chat that consisted of only 3 people and wrote that the target had been found and that it was the new leader of Happy. The bodyguard was pleased that he was able to complete his task, and they very quickly found the new target of the rookie killer. At that moment, a notification came to his phone. When he opened the chat in which he was chatting, he was in shock. His colleagues did not understand what the player's position meant. Did he really want to show off? They did not appreciate his work. At the same time, in the office where the new leader of the Happy sect was sitting, he was counting money at his desk. Holding the money in his hands, he counted them and said that he had little, or rather, he had very little. The new leader asked if this was all because it wasn't even a tenth of what his brother was doing. He was wondering if there would be labor costs. They tried to explain to him that the change of leader, many believers are leaving after the incident with the murder of the government, began a large-scale investigation into this sect. The new leader was very angry and ordered his assistant to keep his mouth shut, and he told him to pay more attention to missionary work. His assistant responded that it would be better if the leader actively participated in external activities. But you leaders started yelling at him. Has he really gone crazy? Most likely he forgot why his brother died. He was killed during these charity works. He asked if he was really taking drugs. And then he asked his assistant if he accidentally switched sides or maybe he wanted to be killed. Like his brother assistant answered him that of course not, but the new leader is their only shepherd. At that moment, the door to their office creaked. The new leader and his assistant turned to see who could have disturbed them. They turned their heads, not understanding who was standing in front of them, but they didn't want to know who it was. She was a young, pretty girl with good physical characteristics. The new leader asked his assistant if there weren't a bunch of bodyguards standing outside. He didn't understand how she got in. The assistant replied that she was definitely a professional. At that moment, when they were talking about bodyguards, the girl smiled because she was able to easily reach this office. The girl asked them if they were really talking about those bandits who weren't even registered with the association. Most likely they hired these amateurs as professionals and they were all lying in the hallway. The girl said that the former leader of this sect entrusted this work to a real professional. She asked the new leader if he really didn't want to last longer than his brother. The new leader extended his hand. He was afraid that she would come close to him. He asked her if she was the killer who killed his brother. The girl answered him that not at all. On the contrary, she is a real bodyguard. And she came to his office in order to protect and save him from the real killer. She came closer to him and told him very loudly that she was a bodyguard so that he could hear her.